My name is Mark Athens. I live in Willis, Texas, and I'm a surgical first assistant licensed through the state of Texas. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I love it. I'm proud of all three of my boys. I couldn't have asked for better. Dakota is my youngest. He is 25. He is God's gift to me. Dakota is very high functioning, but he is autistic. So he sees things in a different light. He is purely honest and open with what he sees, understands, or hears.
I do love my dad. My dad's a very wonderful guy. He takes care of me, takes care of my doctor's appointments, hair appointments, that sort of stuff. Always stands up for me.
We were told that he would never graduate high school. He graduated from high school. He went on to college. It's a tragedy that his mother is deceased and has not seen the young man that he's turned out to be. Kelly was my first love. I spent 22 years of my life with a woman that I love dearly. I feel the void in my heart was something that I longed for.
It's been almost 4 years since the death of Mark's first wife.
I'd tried dating and there wasn't any encounters that were serious. I was hoping to find someone who I could trust enough that if something happens to me, that they can carry on forward to help Dakota so he's not left alone, because I'm not going to be around forever. I met Charity online. Charity said she was a Texas registered nurse. It was a couple of home health agencies. She worked with elderly patients and terminally ill patients. That made me say, wow, she's got to be pretty special if she can do that. We did have a chance to have a date, going to a local restaurant. Charity had told me that she had been married twice and that she had 4 daughters.
Charity is living with her 2 youngest daughters, Paige, 17, and Destiny, 15, in the nearby town of Spring.
She had been divorced from her second husband for almost 10 years. Charity had told me that his name was Bart Parcham, that she didn't have anything to do with Bart, that he was a convicted felon. I said, okay, well, it is what it is. Charity had a magnetism that drew me in personality-wise that in a way kind of reminded me of the boy's mom. Bubbly, friendly.
It only takes a few weeks for Mark to fall in love. Now he introduces Charity to his closest friends, his neighbors, Gina and James, who are living with him while their house is being renovated.
Mark said, hey, I'd like you guys to meet her, see what you think. So I was like, oh, yay, that's so nice. She was very bubbly and I liked her.
She looked very normal to me, just a normal average person. Like, nice.
Mark and Charity start seeing more of one another.
I mean, to fall in love again and feel that for another person, that was something that I hadn't felt in a long time.
Charity came, she was like, hey, I've got to run a few errands. Do you want to come with me? I just have to pick up a prescription and we'll come back. So we go to the pharmacy and she immediately pulls out her insurance card and it said, Charity Parcham, Bart Parcham. And I thought, who's Bart Parcham? And she said, that's my ex.
Charity has been divorced for almost 10 years. It seems strange her ex is still on her insurance card.
But she started immediately talking to the pharmacist, and so I wasn't able to talk more about it. So then we leave the pharmacy and she says, hey, I'm really sorry, but I need to stop by my house. When we get there, she says, my middle daughter, Paige, lives here by herself. Then she goes, oh, I'm gonna go to my bedroom. Come with me, you can see the bedroom. So I go to the bedroom And there's a closet open full of men's clothes. And so I'm thinking, what? That's strange. Why are there men's clothes here if her daughter's here? And then I look down and there's a basket of like laundry, like someone's staying here. And then she takes me through the bathroom and there's like men's cologne, men's razors, shaving cream. And I said, what man lives here? And she says, oh, no man lives here. My ex comes here after working out, showers and changes, and then takes the girls to do stuff. And I was like, okay, but this is a lot of stuff. It literally looked like the girls lived there and he lived there. So when we got back, I went straight to Mark. I was like, okay, I don't understand at all. You may want to discuss that with her.
That was where my confusion starts. How do I take this? Because I was in love with Charity, and because of I wanted things to work, that was the whole intent, was to get a life partner.
And he comes to us and mentions, hey, I've asked Charity to move in with us. And James and I, are like, okay.
Her youngest daughter, Destiny, came with Charity. So I picked up a ready-made family, pretty much.
Charity really took over the house. Like, these are my things, and I'm gonna cook this. And I thought, she just wants us out of here.
Charity wanted to quit work and just concentrate on Destiny and Dakota. At that point in time, I just said, you know what? Sure, let's rock and roll with this. I'm getting back on track with a life, a family life.
I just didn't understand it. We're thinking, he's just so in love. Is this what's happening? We didn't like it at all. Honestly,
I thought that Gina and James were not getting along with Charity because there might be an issue that I'm not seeing. So that weekend, I wanted to go somewhere where James, Gina, and Charity and I could take a little mental health break and, I guess, reconnect.
James and I were a bit reluctant, but we were like, okay, we'll do it.
Charity starts drinking. All of a sudden, she starts forcing me to do these shots. Then I just put my foot down and said, that's it. I'm not doing no more shots.
James snaps a picture of us at the table. And it was, I got a picture of us. I'm posting it on Facebook. And we're like, oh, cute.
Moments after posting the photo, James gets a phone call from an old and trusted friend, Michael Flores. Michael and Charity had been friends and colleagues in the past, but it didn't end well.
I was just like, wow, out of all the people in the world, what are the odds? It had been 2 years since I'd saw Charity. She was more full-figured than she was when I knew her, but I knew it was her as soon as I saw her.
James comes back to the table and he's very freaked out looking. And then James kind of nudges me while Mark and Charity are talking about something. And he says, Mike Flores says, Mark needs to run from Charity. James asks Charity, do you know Mike Flores? And her face was shock. And then James goes, I grew up with him. And in fact, I spoke to him and he didn't have very good things to say about you.
But before Charity can respond, the group is distracted by another bar patron.
Somebody bumps into Charity's chair, which, seemed harmless. Oh, and he was like, oh, sorry, and just walked off. But then she's telling Mark, oh my gosh, I think he touched me. And now Mark's up and he's like, what do you mean? How did he touch you? And she seems to be getting Mark all riled up. There he is, pointing him out.
Man, I was fixing to go at it. I was losing my cool. My saving grace was as James decided, this is done, we got to walk out of here now. We got out in the truck.
Charity is still, badgering Mark. They're fighting. Mark's trying to get her to calm down, and she seems to just want to escalate it. And she's like, you don't even care.
When we were coming down the road here at the house, Charity got out of the truck.
She slams the door, walks over to her vehicle and says, I'm leaving. And Mark's like, what?
And she did, she left.
James and I look at each other and we're thinking, but where is she going? This is not good.
I told James that she isn't who he thinks she is. She's a master manipulator.
I lost everything. I lost everything. She is the spawn of Satan.
Mark Athens' evening out with his friends and girlfriend has ended in confusion.
I'm going like, what the hell just happened?
Charity just tears out of there. And I don't even understand.
James thinks he knows what was behind Charity's hasty retreat.
James says she didn't want to deal with any of the Mike Flores questions from any of us. So it was a giant blown up situation to create drama. And then I think, oh, that's right.
The next morning, there's still no sign of Charity. It's James's chance to get Mark alone.
They sit down and James begins to just unload all this material that Mike Flores, explained to him.
I gave him a rundown of my dealings with her. I met her at the tattoo shop years ago. Charity liked getting older guys to fall for her and then getting what she wanted out of them, whether it was dinner or jewelry or, taking care of some of her bills. Charity just uses, sexual favors to kind of reel them in. She talked about how to manipulate men to get what she wanted out of it. Weak men with money who are searching for a relationship. Use them while she can and just go on to the next. She's a master manipulator. She's sweet on the outside and just a monster on the inside once she gets her fangs sunk in. I told James to tell Mark to get out now while you can before this guy just loses everything. This is the real deal, and she's literally out to take all that she can.
A dire warning, which Mark completely ignores when Charity returns a day later.
James said Mark's response was, well, that may have been her in her past. That's not the way she is now.
You know what? I had lost somebody that I spent 22 years of my life with. To feel that for another person, I opened up totally, 100%.
And now, Gina and James are the ones who feel unwelcome.
There's a lot of tension in the house. You go in to get a cup of coffee. If she's in there, she just immediately removes herself from the room. I'm sure she doesn't want me asking her questions.
I'm getting told over and over that they're just using you. Charity had told me that James had tried to sell her drugs. She had told me also that James had tried to come on to her on multiple occasions. I was upset, of course.
Honestly, I was really hurt by it. He must be believing this stuff. And at that point, James and I were like, we need to immediately get out of Mark's house. We get everything done quick. And we move where we needed to be next door. It was weird. We lived right next door to Mark, but we didn't talk.
Everything really started going into high gear within a matter of weeks. I got down on one knee and asked Charity if she would marry me. And I guess I'm expecting something that, okay, yeah, and then come give me a big hug and a kiss, and oh my gosh, but it's subdued. She looked at me and she said yes, she would. I guess I'm thinking of a crescendo when it was more like a little vibrato, you know. But that's the way that occurred. And she told me she didn't want any of her family knowing. Nobody. Daughters, nobody. Charity had pushed it, wanting to get married in South Dakota at Sturgis. So we went to South Dakota. We got married in City Hall in front of pictures of all the mayors of Deadwood, South Dakota. We go back. The people at the resort that we stayed at had drinks for us there, and that was it. That was the end of the night. What a wedding night, huh? Nothing else happened. Actually, nothing else happened for the next 6 days. So for 6 days, we didn't consummate the marriage? Seriously? What the hell is going on? On the way back, I had 20-something hours of driving to think, and the whole time back, I felt like I'd made one hell of an error.
Once back home in Willis, Mark sets his concerns aside and commits himself to supporting his new family. But it's a strain.
The expenses increased tenfold from the day we were married. Charity told me that Bart didn't pay any child support. He was an ex-con deadbeat dad. That's exactly the way she put it. With Charity and her daughters, I had to pay for vehicles, I had to pay for furniture, I had to pay for apartments, I had to pay for college tuitions, cell phones, and I'm doing it all alone for a lot of people, even though Destiny was the only daughter that lived here. One day, Charity said she had to go see Paige and pick up some things that she had. She left at like 8, 9 in the morning. I would come home from work about 4 or 5-ish in the afternoon. She wasn't here. I was going like, okay, well, she's just busy. I'd text her and couldn't get a reply out of the text. She just disappeared off the face of the earth. Gone. She came back home at about 11 o'clock. And she's going like, well, I had a lot of things I had to get with Paige. I had suspicions that something was up. And that's when Dakota started looking into Charity's background.
Actually, I went through online, found some stuff about her. I went through the Victoria County, Texas Odyssey database. That's actually the court docket system, and she has a criminal record for a theft by check. She said she was a nurse.
All the lights, all the red flags popped up. You can't be a nurse with a criminal record. You just can't do it. I called the Texas State Nursing Board. They went and looked. There wasn't a Charity Parcham or a Charity or anything with her birthday in there. Anything, her social security, anything. I'm going like, are you kidding me? So she's been lying to me all this time about her being a nurse when she never was.
What else is she lying about? Now Mark really wants to know what Charity has been up to.
And then I also remembered that I put GPS trackers on my vehicles, on all the vehicles. So if one of them ever got stolen, I knew exactly where that would be. I said, you know what? I need to look and see where the vehicles are. And guess where the vehicles would be showing up at, especially the one that Charity had. At the old house in Spring.
Where earlier, Gina had observed men's toiletries and clothes.
Imagine that.
Mark Athens has just discovered that his new bride Charity has been spending a lot of time at her previous house.
Of course, I'd already had the devil picking on my shoulder, causing doubt. and doubt was starting to seed pretty hard and heavy then.
True, her daughter Paige lives there, but does her ex-husband Bart live there as well? Mark's suspicions are growing.
There's a lot of things I'll believe, but when it comes down to it and you can't get in touch with somebody, whether you needed them for an emergency or nothing, no contact, cell phones turned off, things changed very rapidly then. I started looking at Charity's cell phone records because the phones were in my name. And it was kind of funny because the morning that she disappeared off the face of the earth, there was a phone call made on her cell phone, and guess whose phone it went to? Bart Parcham's. I confronted Charity about this. I said, "You're calling your ex-husband 3 or 4 times a day." It had to do about the girls. They are his daughters. I said, "So you're telling me that you've sent him over 100 and something texts about his daughters when you never did that before?" She blew up. So she got extremely mad, extremely ticked off. "What are you doing tracking me? You don't trust me." And I told her straight up, "Hell no, I don't trust you. You're doing things that are violating that trust." I asked her if she was sleeping with Bart, and she said no, she was not. But sometimes you don't have to have an admission of guilt whenever you got the proof sitting right in front of your face. She was pissed off and she just took off. After about 10 hours, Charity came back and it was like, "Let's talk. I can fix this. I can do right." I went and said, "Okay, you can't say I'm not going to try."
Charity seems determined to make a fresh new start with Mark.
Charity made reservations at the San Luis Hotel in Galveston for the weekend. Just me and her. Something to rebuild what had been broken. We go to the hotel. The restaurant was a very good dinner, but halfway through the meal, she wanted to go back upstairs. We went back up to the room, and she starts getting a little bit frisky with me. And we end up having sex twice. So I'm going like, okay. We go out for a walk on the beach together. The next morning we get up and go have some fancy brunch there that they have every Sunday. I opened up totally, 100%.
And Charity is in it 100% too. For Dakota's birthday, she organizes a trip they can all 3 enjoy together.
Dakota wanted to go to Fredericksburg. Me and Dakota spent lots of time at Fredericksburg. We always have.
Charity arranges for her daughters to house sit, and the 3 of them head west to Fredericksburg, a popular spot for wine lovers and history buffs.
It's a 4 to 5 hour drive there. Got there in Fredericksburg with the B&B, and then Charity started a conversation that went really south on me, real quick. Charity's talking about her past life, about how one of her boyfriends had made her be a drug mule down in Mexico and do some real wild, crazy stuff. And Dakota's out there with us. So I got uptight. And this is not something that Dakota needed to be hearing, and he doesn't know what to think. I'm sure right now he's in panic mode. And you can tell because with anybody that's autistic, they start flapping their hands. I would think she was trying to bait me into something to where it would get physical, and then she could have me arrested for assault. So it's a he said, she said type situation, because that's exactly what she wanted. She was baiting me into that. I said, I've got to get this under control immediately and isolate this for me and Dakota. And I did. I just said, it stops now. This is not the life I'm gonna lead. I said, Dakota, we gotta go home.
Mark and Dakota make the 5-hour drive home, knowing that when they get there, they'll have to tell Destiny and Paige they left their mom in Fredericksburg to cool down. But that's not how the night unfolds.
Dakota and I pulled in around 4 in the morning. The dogs were gone, and Destiny and Paige were gone, and so were the vehicles. The Mustang, her truck, the truck that I had, all of those vehicles were gone. And I knew what had happened then. I'd been set up. Me and Dakota walk into my house and see a lot of things missing. I mean, a lot of things.
It was very empty, so I was like, where's the stuff that was gone?
My phone starts burning up.
It's a string of texts that were sent by Mark's neighbor, James, while he and Dakota were still on their way home.
You're out in the hill country of Texas. They don't get cell signals down there. So I got them after I got here.
Hours earlier, sometime around midnight, Gina and James had been alerted to trouble.
Champ keeps barking. Champ likes Mark and he likes to watch his house. And James goes outside and he sees a U-Haul truck and a Charger, and there's a man and some girls there.
Gina believes she recognizes the man and at least one of the girls.
The lights were on so you could see Bart and Paige.
Bart Parcham, Charity's ex.
They were going into the house, bringing things out and putting them into the U-Haul. And at this point, James and I are just thinking, this is not good. We were like, this is not good. James says, I don't see Mark's truck. Let me just send him a quick text.
But by the time Mark receives James' messages, it's far too late.
It was 4 a.m. I've driven 800 miles. I'm mentally and physically wiped out. So me and Dakota lay down and went to sleep.
Mark feels he's been burgled, but as his spouse, Charity is entitled to remove her belongings. What happens next is less of a legal gray area.
The next morning, I woke up and my phone is going crazy. I'm getting alerts from my bank, sending me notices of charges right and left. They're wanting to know what's going on. There was $15,000 taken out of my bank account, all to Amazon. And Amazon told me where everything was going, to Spring. Guess who lives in Spring?
Sure, Charity's daughter Paige lives there, but now Mark thinks Gina was right, that Bart Parcham is also staying there.
I knew what had happened. I knew who did it. In the meantime, Charity is texting me, burning my phone up, trying to get me to come pick her up from Fredericksburg. First thing that popped into my head is Charity was not even in Fredericksburg.
Mark has his suspicions. Now he goes looking for proof.
I went to Sam's and actually said, I want to see who used my card, and they pulled it up on their video surveillance. And who was on the video surveillance? Charity and Bart. When she's trying to get me to go back to Fredericksburg to pick her up, her and Bart are here in the Woodlands at Sam's trying to pick up stuff they had just bought off my credit card together.
Bart may be Charity's ex, but as far as Mark is concerned, the two of them seem to be working together.
Her and Bart, they both facilitated this together. They instigated this whole thing and had it planned.
Mark has reached his limit.
I got a local attorney down here in Conroe. I filed for a divorce. Everything went to court. This time I'm going full force, locked and cocked. I'm ready to go.
Less than a month later, with the divorce proceedings already underway, Mark looks like he might be on the hook for a hefty amount of spousal support. Until he gets a call that could change everything.
The detective called me on the phone and says, I've got some news for you. I found Charity's husband. And I said, Bart, yeah, I know about Bart. He's going like, no, Trevor Hendry, her real husband. And I'm going like, what?
Trevor Hendry, the guy Charity said she'd been a drug mule for, wasn't just an ex-boyfriend. He was a husband.
The detective told me they've never been divorced. I'm I'm trying to unscramble all of what I was just told.
Charity had married Bart Bartram in 1999, divorced Bart in 2002, married Trevor just 1 day later, and then left him without bothering to divorce him.
And he says, guess what? She illegally married Bart Bartram again after she was married to Trevor Hendry. And then she married you.
4 weddings, 1 divorce. Charity is now married to 3 different men.
And I'm going like, hold on. This is bull, right? You're kidding me, right?
That whole entire court case was the biggest mess I have ever seen.
It's baffling. It's upsetting.
The Texas justice system failed me completely.
A detective from the sheriff's department has just discovered that Mark Athens' wife, Charity, is married to 2 other men besides Mark.
And I'm going like, you've got to be kidding me. And he's going like, no. They filed a warrant for her arrest and she was taken into custody.
No, she's facing court tomorrow on the bigamy charge.
Yes, sir. She is in court. She's been indicted by a grand jury. She's going to be in court for the criminal charges tomorrow.
When the detective sent over Charity Bartram's case, it had everything in it that a prosecutor would need to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
With Charity now charged with bigamy, Mark expects he won't even have to bother about a divorce, let alone spousal support.
I was elated. I was going like, my God, now all this is over. This is done. She's a bigamist. So none of this stuff goes forward. Divorce proceedings are going to be stopped immediately because I'm not legally married to her. And we've got proof I'm not. Did that happen? No, it did not. Boy, was I shocked. Boy, did I get a kick in the balls. Even after the voided marriage was submitted to Judge McDonald in her court, she refused to accept it. And she still kept coming after me.
Mark fires his attorney and seeks out a tougher advocate.
When Mark called me, every petition that they had filed with the court was getting shut down and denied.
Sarah immediately started trying to get this divorce dismissed because it's bigamy.
It was shocking. This was the first time in all of my years of practice this judge wasn't following the law. Mark was ordered to pay $40,000 as a cash settlement. He was ordered to give her a car. He was also ordered to give other cash settlements with regard to the decree.
At one point in time, I just said, Charity Bartram is not my legal wife. And I locked my heels and I dug in and I said, I'm not paying another dime.
But this only makes things worse.
Charity had filed an enforcement to throw Mark in jail because he hadn't paid his cash settlement. She wanted her money.
The judge held me in contempt of court. There were 5 or 6 orders of contempt.
Mark faces at least a year and a half behind bars.
Essentially, Charity told the court what she wanted and the court granted it.
And what am I supposed to tell my son? I'm sorry, son, but I've got to go to jail for 18 months. Charity showed herself walking on TV, smiling because she knew that day I was going to go to jail. Who does that? Who does that but a professional criminal or the spawn of Satan?
I can't believe that we have someone who is so bold that she files a petition to enforce spousal support with felony charges that are pending against her for bigamy. That's crazy.
Why was the law failing me? It should have been protecting me.
Mark's lawyer brings in the detective who arrested Charity to present proof that she's a bigamist.
This judge saw the police officer in the courtroom, and the judge just wouldn't even give us an opportunity to present the evidence. I was bamboozled, absolutely bamboozled.
And everything that Mark's attorney, Sarah, put out there, she knocked it down. Everything that Charity's attorney, whatever his name is, he's the sorriest attorney I ever saw in my life. She went with it.
Were you already married when you married someone else? One comment.
At last, Mark's side catches what should be a break in the criminal court.
Today, in court, Ms. Charity Parcham pled guilty to the offense of bigamy.
That basically proves what Mark Athens has been saying in the divorce. She's not really my wife. She is not legally married to me. Therefore, I shouldn't have to pay her a dime.
Charity pled guilty to bigamy, and Judge McDonald still didn't rescind her orders.
Montgomery County Judge Patrice McDonald has ordered Athens to pay $96,000 to Parcham by tomorrow or face jail time.
Sarah knew she's going to put you in jail. Okay, well, I've already talked to my son. Prepare for this. I am not backing down from this.
This wasn't just about his wife being married to other people. This was about his wife taking advantage of him and his son, leaving Mark financially destitute.
The clock is ticking for surgical assistant Mark Athens. With few exceptions, if you've done time in jail in Texas, you can't practice medicine. And yet, in less than 24 hours, that's where Mark is going. Mark's lawyer files a last-minute appeal.
We filed an emergency stay, and we were requesting that the Court of Appeals freeze all of the trial court proceedings.
From what I understand, they had only had it for about 15 minutes before they made a decision. The appellate court overrode Judge McDonald's decision and dismissed it. Told him, basically, leave this man alone. Sarah saved me from going to jail.
It was just a sigh of relief because all along, this is absolutely what he deserved.
But I've got to go to jail. I was pretty emotional just to get it over with. Actually, I did. I cried over it.
3 months after filing for divorce, and barely 5 months after their wedding, Mark's marriage to Charity is officially dissolved. The ordeal is over.
Charity had scammed over $425,000 from me. I had lost funds in over $220,000 in legal fees. Everything that I had, all my retirement, was gone. I mean, I lost everything.
The sentence for bigamy in Texas, because it's a third-degree felony, is anywhere from 2 years up to 10 years in prison.
Charity gets 4 years, but not in prison.
She walks away with probation, not a day in jail. After all the people she's hurt, where's the justification in that?
I don't know what's in Charity's future. I hope she doesn't hurt anybody else, but I'm not so sure I can trust that hope.
Some good has come from this ordeal. Dakota discovered he's got a valuable skill set.
Dakota has a knack of sizing people up a hell of a lot better than mine, I can tell you that. So he's already got his license in process through the state of Texas to become a private detective.
I like to find out the truth. I'm like the truth seeker. I want to be the best of the best when it comes to investigations.
In spite of all that Mark lost, there's one precious and irreplaceable thing he managed to win back.
James checks his phone and he's like, Mark wants to talk to us. So James goes over there and Mark says, hey, I am really sorry. And he really was regretful.
The things that I look for in a relationship, I've gotten already. Because I've got a relationship with James and Gina that after what had happened, And me coming back trying to eat crow and apologize, they could have told me to off, but they didn't. Gina and James, I know that if something happens to me or if Dakota needs help, he's going to have it. And I know that.
Now that Charity's gone, Mark is a different person. He's not frustrated all the time. It's back to life as normal.
I'm back on the dating scene. I'm just more thorough now about looking at people. I want to try to find somebody that will love my family and give me the same amount of love and attention that I'm going to give her back, because I learned that I deserve that.
Bilbao 1997 cold case solved surprise arrest rattles entire community. But long before the world saw that headline flash in red across evening news screens, long before cameras captured a quiet, middle-aged man being escorted down the dim stairwell of his apartment building, long before reporters swarmed the narrow streets of the old town, searching for neighbors who might utter a trembling quote, there was a night in late autumn when Bilbao swallowed a secret so cleanly, so silently, that it would take 27 years for anyone to understand what truly slipped beneath its surface. It began without warning, without struggle, without even the courtesy of a scream. It began with absence, the kind that chills the spine, because it doesn't announce itself, it just replaces what used to be there. She was last seen under the muted glow of Plaza Nueva, where cafe tables were being stacked for the night, and the air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts and wet stone. She told her friend she'd walk home. It was a short route, one she had taken hundreds of times. She wasn't drunk, wasn't distressed, wasn't in a hurry. She laughed, waved, adjusted the purple scarf wrapped around her neck, and stepped into the narrow lane that curled toward the river. No one knows what she saw in the next 7 minutes. No one knows whether she turned left or right first. No one knows why the city, usually vibrant with footsteps and conversation even after midnight, seemed to swallow her whole, without leaving a single echo. By morning, the only proof she had ever passed that way was the scarf. The same purple scarf her mother had gifted her the previous winter, draped neatly across the railing of a small pedestrian bridge over the water. It wasn't snagged, not torn, not dropped in haste. It was placed, deliberately, almost gently, like a signature left by someone who wanted to be noticed, but not found. The bridge was otherwise empty. No signs of a struggle, no personal belongings, no marks on the pavement. Just the scarf moving slightly in the wind, as if still trying to mimic the rhythm of someone who was no longer there. The police arrived before sunrise, their flashlights cutting through the mist rolling off the river. Officers walked in slow, purposeful lines, scanning for footprints, fibers, cigarette butts, anything. But the scene felt unnaturally clean, as if someone had prepared it, as if the city itself didn't want to give detectives anything to work with. A veteran officer would later say he felt the air tighten when he stepped onto the bridge, as if the night had closed its fist just before they arrived. Her disappearance hit the community like a shockwave. She was young, well-liked, studious, polite. She had no enemies anyone could name. Neighbors described her as the girl who smiled even at strangers. Overnight posters with her photo appeared across storefronts, bus stops, and the metal shutters of closed bars. Local news channels plastered her face next to flashing captions, "Mysterious disappearance, vanished without a trace. Strange clue found on bridge." Bilbao hadn't seen a case like this in years, and the suddenness of it triggered collective dread. The kind that makes parents check windows twice and causes people to walk home faster than usual. Her family broke down almost immediately. The father begged on television for information. The mother refused to sleep, in fear she would miss a phone call. Volunteers searched parks, alleys, riverbanks, abandoned warehouses. Tips poured in by the hundreds. People thought they saw her on a bus, in a supermarket, in a cafe on the other side of the river. Every tip evaporated, every rumor led nowhere, Years later, investigators would say the case was cursed from the beginning. They couldn't explain why no security camera, not even the old grainy ones mounted outside banks, captured her passing. They couldn't explain why no taxi driver, no bartender, no night worker recalled seeing her. It was as if she dissolved into the cold air the moment she stepped away from her friends. 3 weeks later, a pair of hikers found her body. Not in the river, not in the city, but in a forested area several kilometers away, lying among pine needles and damp soil, as if carefully placed. No signs of struggle, no obvious wounds, no visible trauma. Her hair was neatly arranged as if someone had brushed it before leaving her there. The medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death, couldn't say when she died, couldn't say whether she suffered. The report was a list of what couldn't be concluded. The forest quickly became a place people avoided. Even hikers stopped going there. Locals whispered that the place felt wrong, like someone was watching from behind the tree trunks. And in the weeks after her body was found, the city seemed to contract emotionally quieter nights. Locked doors, lights left on parents, insisting children walk in groups. It wasn't just grief, it was violation. The sense that something dangerous was still out there, maybe watching, maybe waiting. Police investigated relentlessly for years. They interviewed ex-boyfriends, co-workers, classmates. They questioned drifters, truck drivers, out-of-town laborers. They combed through phone records, bank records, library records. They set traps, ran undercover operations, monitored suspects from unmarked cars. Every new detective assigned to the case believed they would be the one to break it. None did. The suspect list grew, then shrank, then grew again. A man who lived near the bridge was questioned, but released after an alibi from a neighbor placed him at home. A construction worker was briefly detained after bragging in a bar. But his story fell apart under questioning. A drifter matching a vague witness description was found sleeping in an abandoned warehouse, but he had no connection whatsoever. Every lead dissolved. Every theory collapsed under its own weight. Patterns didn't match. Timelines didn't line up. Clues contradicted each other. Detectives lost sleep. Ages showed on their faces. Marriages strained under the weight of obsessive late-night work. The city settled into a resigned numbness, the kind that forms when hope has been pulled too hard for too long. By 2005, the case was cold as stone. Newer tragedies took over headlines. Newer stories pushed the girl's face off the evening news. Her parents left Bilbao in 2009, unable to walk past the cafe where she was last seen, unable to bear the silence. Their house sat empty for years, curtains drawn, dust covering the windows like frost. Some neighbors swore they heard noises inside at night, a creak, a window tapping a soft thud. But no one was willing to check. When a property agent finally entered the home to prepare it for sale, he said the air felt heavy, as if grief had seeped into the walls themselves. Each anniversary, a small candlelight gathering would form near the bridge. Just a handful of people, mostly older residents, who remembered her placing flowers on the railing where the scarf had been found. No speeches, no songs, just the quiet weight of a story unfinished. Some years, a retired detective would stand at a distance, watching, gripping a worn leather notebook filled with scribbled theories that had never led to justice. He never spoke to anyone. He just watched, then disappeared before the candles burned out. And still time moved on. The city changed. Buildings were renovated, new cafes opened, tourists flowed in and out. But the bridge never became just a bridge again. It held a shadow, a memory, a question. Then, this year, a young forensic analyst reviewing archived evidence noticed something odd about the purple scarf. A thin thread embedded deep in its fibers, overlooked because the technology of 1997 couldn't identify anything meaningful from it. New methods could. New equipment could. And when the sample was run through modern analysis, it produced a profile. Not a full DNA match, but a trace connected to a name that had been buried inside the original case file, a name crossed out by a detective who believed the neighbor's alibi. A name that by bureaucratic accident or blind trust had never been seriously pursued again. The analyst took the results to a senior investigator who stared at the name in stunned silence. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Not because the man was notorious, he wasn't. Not because he was violent, he had no record. But because he lived just 3 blocks from the bridge in 1997, because he had moved apartments twice in the years since, and because he had kept the same quiet routine for decades, blending into the background of the city like one more shadow on a crowded street. When officers knocked on his door last month, he answered calmly. No surprise, no denial, no confusion, just a stillness that made the youngest officer shift uneasily. According to police sources, he looked at them, nodded once, and said only, "It took you long enough." Not a confession, not an admission, a statement, a verdict, a prediction fulfilled. News outlets erupted within hours. Bilbao 1997 cold case solved. Surprise arrest shocks community. Breakthrough after 27 years. Cameras crowded outside his building. Neighbors cried in disbelief, and reporters repeated the same unanswered question, why him? Why now? Why after nearly 3 decades did the case finally breathe again? And more haunting than all of that was the expression the arresting officer described, a faint, quiet smile on the man's face. A smile that suggested not fear, not guilt, but familiarity. As if he knew something no one else did. As if the story everyone thought was ending had only just opened its first page. The moment the arrest hit the news, Bilbao reacted like a city jolted awake from a long, troubled sleep, confused, angry, disoriented, flooded with memories it wasn't ready to face. People gathered outside apartment windows, craning their necks to see the street where police cars had lined up earlier that morning. Shopkeepers lowered their radios when the suspect's name played on hourly updates, repeating it with disbelief as if the sound of it simply didn't fit inside the story they had carried for 27 years. Some swore they had seen him around the quiet man with slow steps and a neutral expression, the man who always paid in exact change, the man who held the elevator door for strangers without saying a word. Others insisted they had never noticed him until now, that he had moved through the city like a shadow, brushing against the edges of everyday life. Everyone was certain of one thing: no one suspected him. Police sources leaked fragments, not details, not confirmation, just enough to ignite the city's anxiety. For the first time in decades, journalists revisited the forest where her body had been found, walking through the overgrown paths, with cameras trembling slightly in the wind. The place hadn't changed much. The pine trees still leaned at the same angles, and the ground still looked as though it was waiting for something to disturb it. Reporters didn't dare step too far in. Even they felt it, the same cold pull investigators had described in their old notes. But inside the police station, behind the long glass of an interview room, the man at the center of all this remained motionless. He sat straight, hands folded neatly on the table, eyes lowered, not blinking. Officers observing through the glass said he didn't seem nervous, didn't seem angry, didn't seem resigned. He simply existed, like he had been preparing for this seat, this room, this moment for years. A detective tried breaking the silence by asking if he needed water. The man nodded politely but didn't drink it. The glass sat untouched, a bead of condensation sliding slowly down its side, the only movement in the room. The first question came softly. "Do you know why you're here?" His reply was just as soft. "Of course." They asked where he was the night she disappeared. He answered calmly, word for word, matching the alibi he had given in 1997. Home, asleep, alone. A neighbor confirmed his presence. That neighbor has been dead for 15 years. Detectives pressed further. They asked if he remembered her. His eyes lifted for the first time, revealing something unsettling, not recognition but calculation, as though he was searching for the exact angle of truth he wanted to reveal. Everyone remembered her, he said. Bilbao was not that big. They asked if he ever spoke to her. He said no. They asked if he ever followed her. He said no. They asked if he ever walked over the bridge that night. He paused. Just for a heartbeat. People walk over bridges, he said. It's the nature of bridges. It wasn't deflection. It was something stranger. A kind of philosophical tone that made even seasoned investigators shift in their seats. They weren't speaking to a panicked suspect. They were speaking to someone who understood exactly how much power silence had in a homicide investigation. DNA evidence came next. They expected outraged denial and insult anything. Instead, he leaned back slightly and listened as if someone was reading him a bedtime story. When they explained that the scarf he touched had been preserved in an evidence vault for 27 years, he tilted his head. It's remarkable, he murmured, what time can reveal. Detectives debated whether it was sarcasm or admiration. No one could tell. Outside the station, crowds gathered. Some shouted. Some cried. Some simply stood motionless, their faces tightening as childhood fears resurfaced, the fear of walking home alone, the fear of dark corners and quiet footsteps behind them, the fear that someone in the city was watching. Every new detail leaked to the press added pressure, as if the city needed closure, but wasn't prepared for the truth closure required. Inside the archive room, the young forensic analyst who discovered the thread sat alone, staring at the old case files spread across her desk. She had requested access to everything: diagrams, maps, crime scene photos, witness statements, personal items, because she couldn't shake the feeling that the evidence had always been there, hiding in plain sight. She studied the scarf again, this time under a magnifying lamp. She saw the faint indentations on one edge mark, so subtle they could easily be mistaken for normal fabric wear. But under the right light, angled just so they resembled partial pressure points, as if someone had pinched the scarf precisely there while placing it on the railing. Her breath tightened. She checked the old photos taken at the bridge. The scarf was lying at an angle too neat, too balanced, almost staged, as if it were meant not to be missed. She flipped the photo, zoomed in. On the left side of the railing was a faint smudge, one that the original investigators marked as unknown residue, inconclusive. Back then, it would have been impossible to analyze. Today, maybe not. She spent hours re-examining the forgotten debris bag associated with that scene. Dust debris, tiny fibers, a bit of wood splintering from the railing. She wasn't sure what she expected, but she found something, a particle that didn't match anything from the environment. Grayish metallic with a pattern too uniform to be natural. She logged it for testing. Her hands trembled slightly. Back in the interview room, the suspect remained unnervingly composed. A new detective stepped into the room, someone older, someone who had worked the case in 1997 and still carried the weight of it in his posture. He sat across the table, exhaled deeply, and spoke without preamble. "We never forgot her," he said. The suspect's eyes flicked upward. "I know," he replied quietly. The older detective leaned forward. "Then tell me, why did it take 27 years to find you?" The man offered a faint smile, a smile without warmth, a smile that shouldn't belong in a homicide interview room. "Because you weren't supposed to find me then." The detective froze. "What does that mean?" "It means," the suspect said, voice low, "that the story wasn't finished. Not the answer of a guilty man. Not the answer of an innocent man. The answer of someone who sees the world differently than everyone else." The interrogation paused. Officers stepped into the hallway, whispering among themselves, frustrated, confused. Some believed he was taunting them. Others believed he was broken, delusional. A few believed something else entirely, that he was confessing without confessing, admitting, guiding them somewhere they hadn't yet looked. Meanwhile, the forensic laboratory worked late into the night. Machines hummed, screens glowed, analysts cross-checked data pulled from ancient samples. The technician handling the metallic particle isolated its material composition. It wasn't wood. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't residue from the scarf. It was flake-like thin, with a distinct pattern of wear found on only one type of object: the inner lining of certain heavy-duty gloves manufactured in the late 1990s for industrial use. The analyst pulled up inventory records of factories operating near the bridge in 1997. One facility produced metal fittings and required workers to use that exact glove model. She checked employee rosters. The suspect's name appeared on the list. Her heart thundered. She called the lead detective immediately. Inside the station, as the call came through, the suspect sat quietly staring at his own reflection in the darkened window. His expression was unreadable. Not triumphant, not remorseful, something in between. Something that suggested he had been waiting for this moment, that every hour since 1997 had been counted, that every day had been part of a clock only he could hear. They brought him back into the room and confronted him with the new evidence. This time, he didn't speak, didn't look up, didn't blink. The silence stretched long enough to feel unnatural. When he finally did speak, it was a whisper. "Do you understand what you've opened?" The detectives exchanged a glance. "What did we open?" one of them asked. He leaned forward just an inch, just enough to send a chill across the room. "Something you're not ready to finish." The recording of that moment, though not released publicly, was described by one officer as the single most unnerving sentence I've heard in 20 years. Outside, the crowd continued to grow. Some held candles, some held signs, some simply held their breath. And somewhere deep inside the evidence vault, beneath layers of dust and cardboard, another item from 1997 waited quietly in its sealed box, an item no one had re-examined. Yet an item the original investigators had marked as possibly unrelated. An item that would soon pull the entire case into darker territory than anyone expected. The item buried deep inside the evidence vault was small enough to fit in a child's hand and insignificant enough that most detectives in 1997 barely glanced at it. A key, ordinary rust along the edges, no markings except a faint scratch across its bow. It had been found near the forest site where her body was discovered, half buried beneath pine needles, dismissed as a random object dropped by a hiker or jogger. It didn't match her home key, didn't match anything reported missing, didn't belong to any known lock in her life. The lead investigator at the time wrote one short note beside it, likely unrelated, and with that it vanished into storage. But now, nearly 3 decades later, a rookie officer retrieving additional evidence boxes accidentally knocked over a stack, sending old envelopes spilling across the table. The key slid out of one, clattering against the metal top with a sound far too loud for such a small object. He picked it up, turned it between his fingers, and frowned. Why had no one analyzed it? Why had no one tested for prints once the technology advanced? Why was it sitting here forgotten when the suspect now in custody lived only a few kilometers from where it was found? He logged the discovery. Within 20 minutes, the key was being photographed, swabbed, scanned, and examined under a microscope. Under intense magnification, analysts noticed something strange. The scratch wasn't random. It was deliberate, almost like a number that had been partially scraped away. The remaining curve looked like the bottom half of a 3 or an 8. No one could be certain. In the hallway outside the lab, detectives paced hollow-eyed from hours of interrogation and sleepless nights. The younger ones whispered theories with nervous excitement. The older ones remained skeptical, worn down by years of false hope. The lead investigator knew better than to jump to conclusions. Evidence, not adrenaline, solves cases. But something about this key gnawed at him. Too convenient. Too sudden. Too perfectly timed. The suspect's cryptic warnings replayed in his mind. "You weren't supposed to find me then. You've opened something you're not ready to finish." Words that lingered like smoke in a sealed room. Meanwhile, in his cell, the suspect sat on the narrow bench with his hands resting calmly on his knees. He didn't ask for updates, didn't demand a lawyer, didn't speak to officers escorting him. He simply stared at the concrete floor, occasionally tracing invisible shapes on the surface with his finger, as if remembering something only he could see. The guard supervising him said he hummed softly once, a low, steady tone, almost like a lullaby. But the moment the guard leaned closer to listen, the humming stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so sharp it felt almost intentional. Back in the lab, the metallic particle found near the scarf was confirmed to come from gloves used in the suspect's old workplace. But one question loomed heavier than all others. If he handled the scarf, why leave it so visibly on the bridge railing? Why leave such a deliberate clue? Serial offenders hid evidence. They didn't display it. Unless the display was part of the message. Investigators revisited the old crime scene photos. They projected them onto a large screen in a dark briefing room. The scarf, the railing, the surrounding pavement, shadows, light angles, footprints. Every pixel analyzed. A technician enhanced the images, adjusting contrast, removing distortion caused by the 1997 camera equipment. And then, as the resolution sharpened, something unexpected emerged: faint outlines at the edge of the frame. Not footprints exactly, but indentations in the dirt that followed a subtle curved path. A detective stepped forward. Zoom right there. The shape clarified: not boot prints, not tire marks, but drag patterns. Thin, consistent, almost invisible. The kind made by something narrow and metallic being pulled across the ground. Something like a keychain, or a small object attached to a lanyard. The room fell into a heavy silence. The lead detective rubbed his forehead. It was there the whole time, he muttered. Buried under bad lighting and old film. The team split into units. One group re-examined forest site photos. Another pulled the suspect's employment records, checking for locker keys, storage keys, facility keys. Another contacted the manufacturer of the gloves, acquiring catalogs from the late 90s. They worked like a machine, fueled by adrenaline and disbelief. But while the department burned with activity, Bilbao trembled. News anchors repeated the same questions every hour. How did police miss a suspect living so close? What was the motive? Was the community safe? Neighbors gave interviews from behind, partially opened doors. Their eyes darting nervously down hallways as if afraid he might be watching. People who thought they understood their city now felt betrayed by their own familiarity. What else have we been living beside one woman? Asked reporters, trembling. Who else could be out there? A young man added, his voice cracking. Stores closed early. Parents picked up their children from school before the final bell. Taxi drivers refused late-night fares to the old town. The bridge where the scarf was found became a gathering point for both mourners and the merely curious. Flowers piled along the railing, candles lined the sidewalk in flickering rows, and above it all, the purple scarf from the 1997 photo, now enlarged on breaking news screens, floated through broadcasts like a ghost returning to demand justice. Inside the station, progress accelerated. The key from the forest was scanned using modern 3D imaging. Analysts compared its shape to thousands of key types stored in digital catalogs. After 2 hours, a match appeared: a storage unit key manufactured in the mid-90s for a now-defunct self-storage company located near the industrial district. The company had closed in 2003, the building abandoned since then. Records were incomplete, most lost or destroyed. Only fragments of tenant logs survived. The lead detective ordered a team to the location immediately. The building stood like a decaying skeleton on the outskirts of the city windows. Shattered graffiti covering metal shutters, silence pooling beneath broken street lamps. The storage units lined a dark corridor that still smelled faintly of old dust oil and metal. Officers swept the area with flashlights, calling out numbers as they passed unit after unit. Unit 32, someone said. The scratched curve on the key could have been the bottom of a 3. Unit 38, another added. The curve could have belonged to an 8. Each lock was tested. Dozens jammed from rust. Some opened with unrelated keys. Then, in the center of the corridor, a faint click echoed the sound of a tumbling mechanism shifting perfectly into place. The door to Unit 38 slid open with a slow, reluctant groan. Inside, dust particles drifted through flashlight beams like tiny, aimless ghosts. The unit looked empty at first glance. Concrete floor, bare metal walls, a few rotting cardboard boxes in the corner. But something felt wrong. The dust on the floor settled in uneven patterns. The air was colder than the hallway. and the silence had a thickness to it, a presence. Check the boxes the detective ordered. The first one disintegrated on touch, collapsing in a cloud of gray powder. The second held old newspapers curled and yellowed. The third was different, heavier, its bottom reinforced with tape. An officer used a knife to cut it open. Inside lay objects too carefully arranged to be accidental. A glove identical to the model from the suspect's factory. A strip of purple fabric torn from a scarf. A notebook filled with tight, methodical handwriting. No names, no dates. Only observations. Movements, patterns. Descriptions of people walking at night. Notes about shadows and silence. Sentences that read like someone studying human behavior from a distance. And at the bottom of the box, a photograph. The girl, alive, smiling, standing near the river on a sunny day. The picture had been taken from far away, zoomed in, grainy. But there was no mistaking her. On the back, scrawled in the same handwriting as the notebook, were 2 words. She noticed. A chill ran through the officers so sharply some of them stepped back. One detective's hands shook as he lifted the photograph into the light. The realization hit the room like a hammer. The suspect had known her. He had watched her. He had followed her. Long before the night she disappeared. The evidence spread out before them painted a darker, more deliberate narrative than anyone expected. This was no impulse, no random act. This was studied, tracked, measured. Back at the station, the suspect was escorted into the interview room once more. Officers placed the photograph in front of him. For the first time since his arrest, he reacted. His gaze softened. A flicker of nostalgia crossed his features, almost tender, almost mournful. She noticed what a detective demanded. He exhaled slowly. That depends on how closely you're willing to look. The detective slammed the table. Tell us what she noticed. The man's eyes rose calm and steady. Everything. The room froze. The suspect leaned back, closing his eyes. And I think he said quietly, "You're starting to notice everything too." As the officers exchanged nervous glances as the photo lay between them like a warning as the weight of the evidence began to reshape the entire investigation. A realization grew quiet, but undeniable. This case was no longer about solving a murder. It was about understanding a mind. And the darkness inside it was deeper than they had imagined. The photograph sat under the harsh interrogation lights like an exposed nerve, its edges curling slightly with age. Its image frozen in a moment far too peaceful for what it now represented. She stood near the riverbank, sunlight catching the strands of her hair, unaware that somewhere behind the lens someone had chosen her. Someone had already begun studying the cadence of her footsteps, the arc of her smile, the way she looked over her shoulder when crossing the street. The suspect watched the detectives stare at the photo, their expressions tightening as the implications sank deeper into the room's stale air. "You followed her," one detective said, voice low, almost incredulous. "I observed," the suspect corrected gently. "People misunderstand the difference." The detective leaned forward. "You photographed her. You kept notes. You collected pieces of her life like they belonged to you." The suspect nodded, but not with pride. Nor remorse. It was something else, resignation maybe. Or acceptance. "Some lives," he said, "cross your path and change its direction." Another detective snapped, "She didn't change yours. You took hers." The suspect didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't blink. "If you say so." The room chilled. But while the interrogation teetered between revelation and ambiguity, the evidence team continued dissecting Unit 38. They cataloged every item meticulously. The gloves, the fabric, the notebook filled with uncanny observations. There were pages describing how she walked faster in the cold, how she paused before entering her building to check her bag, how she chose the well-lit side of the street, how she carried keys between her fingers when nervous. The handwriting was precise, almost elegant, each stroke shaped by someone who believed in order. But something stranger hid between the lines, literal gaps, blank spaces left at the end of certain entries, as if reserved for details that were never filled in. The gaps were too intentional, the spacing too uniform to be accidental. They looked like pauses in thought, pauses in memory, pauses before something irreversible, Officers photographing the notebook found one page torn out, leaving behind jagged fibers. They sifted through the boxes again, searched the corners, checked beneath dust piles, even pried open a loose floor panel. Nothing. The missing page was gone, taken years ago, or destroyed on purpose. Either possibility chilled them. At the station, the lead investigator reviewed the contents of the notebook digitally enlarged on a monitor. He noticed a recurring symbol, a small curved mark beside certain entries. Sometimes it looked like a C, sometimes like a crescent, sometimes like half of a number. The symbol appeared sporadically next to details describing her habits. Buys tea, not coffee. Takes stairs when anxious. Checks reflection in storefront windows. Looks behind her twice when crossing the plaza. The investigator called the forensic analyst who found the thread on the scarf. She examined the symbol closely and whispered, "It's not a letter. It's a mark he made when she noticed something. That's why it's always next to awareness behaviors." The room fell silent. Noticed what one detective asked. The analyst didn't look away from the screen. Noticed him. Their stomachs knotted. In the interview room, the suspect remained unreadable. The detective paced around him, trying to fracture his composure. "You followed her for weeks, maybe months. We found your notes. We found your photograph. We found your glove material on her scarf. This didn't come out of nowhere." The suspect lifted his gaze. "Nothing ever comes out of nowhere." The detective slammed his fist against the table. "Stop speaking in riddles." The suspect remained calm. "I'm speaking in truth." The older detective entered the room, then closing the door quietly behind him. He sat down, placing the photograph gently on the table. "Tell me," he said softly, "what did she notice? What did she see that made you follow her?" The suspect studied him carefully, as if deciding whether the older man deserved the answer. "She saw me before I saw her," he said finally. "That changes things." The detective frowned, meaning, "She didn't fear me," the suspect said. "She understood something. Most people walk through life unaware. She wasn't one of them." What did she understand? "That some shadows walk beside you, not behind you." The detective stiffened. "That sounds like justification." "It's explanation," the suspect replied. "Not all shadows harm you. Some prepare you." The detective's hand tightened around the edge of the table. "Prepare for what?" The suspect leaned back, exhaling softly. "That's the part you still think belongs to the past." The detectives exchanged a quick, uneasy glance. His words carried weight without context, menace, without threat, meaning without clarity. Meanwhile, in the evidence room, officers made another discovery, a small cylindrical container beneath layers of debris in the storage unit. Inside was a tightly rolled strip of film negatives. They rushed it to the lab. Technicians developed the images in complete silence, dread filling the space as shadows emerged on glossy sheets. The first image, the girl walking through a crowded market, unaware she was being photographed. The second, her reflection in a shop window, someone standing far behind her, blurred but unmistakably tall. The third, her waiting at a crosswalk, looking over her shoulder, directly at the camera. The fourth, the bridge, the night, the scarf on her neck. And the fifth, a blurred corner of a frame, showing part of a face. Not hers. Not the suspect's either. The technicians stared. The face was small, pale, childlike, but the angle made it impossible to identify age or gender. It did not resemble the suspect. It was someone else entirely. The lead investigator froze when he saw it. "Is this real?" The technician nodded. "No manipulation, these are original negatives." The investigator felt something cold grip his chest. Who was there with him? No one had an answer. Back in interrogation, the suspect seemed to sense the shift in the building. His posture changed, slightly straighter, more alert. "You found the unit," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. The detective stiffened. "How do you know that?" "You're louder when you discover something important." The detective swallowed. "Who else was with you at the bridge?" For the first time since his arrest, the suspect's eyes darkened. "The question isn't who," he said. "It's when." The detective's voice trembled. "When what?" "When a story becomes more than one person's narrative," the suspect said softly. "When two paths converge." The detective slammed the photograph with the blurred face onto the table. "Who is this?" The suspect studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he whispered, "That's the part I never wanted you to find." The air in the room thickened. "Who is it?" the detective repeated. The suspect closed his eyes. "Someone who should have remained outside your understanding." The detective leaned closer, voice sharp. "Tell us. Now." The suspect opened his eyes, and for the first time, emotion flickered, not fear, not guilt, but something closer to sorrow. "You think the story ends with me," he said, "but every story that ends begins somewhere else." The detective's heart pounded. "Are you protecting someone?" "Not protecting," the suspect murmured, acknowledging. "Who?" the detective demanded. The suspect whispered, barely audible. "Someone she noticed too." The detective stepped back. The room felt colder. He called for the lead investigator immediately. Meanwhile, the forensic analyst cross-referenced the film image with archived missing person records. Her hands trembled when she found one entry from 1997 filed just 8 days before the girl vanished. A child reported missing. No leads, no suspects, no recovery. The case was closed for lack of evidence, and the photo from the film negative matched the child's last known appearance. Her blood turned to ice. She called the detective. "You need to see this." But before anyone reached the lab, alarms blared through the station, a guard shouting from the cell hallway. "He's gone." Chaos erupted. Officers scrambled, doors slammed, radios crackled. The suspect had vanished. From a locked cell, with no weapon, no tools, no struggle, no sound. Just gone, as if he'd stepped out of the world the same way she disappeared in 1997. If you want the same cinematic continuation, the alarm cut through the police station like a blade, shrill, metallic, impossible to ignore. Officers sprinted down the corridor, boots hammering against the concrete floor as radios erupted with overlapping voices, panicked and disbelieving. The lead investigator shoved through the crowd surrounding the empty cell, staring at the open door as if his brain refused to process what his eyes saw. The lock wasn't broken. The hinges weren't forced. The bar mechanism wasn't tampered with. The door simply hung ajar, the interior untouched, the bench still cold from the suspect's presence. "He was here 15 minutes ago," the guard said, trembling. "I swear he was sitting right there." I looked away for a second when dispatch called, and when I turned back, "There's no way he left without being seen," an officer snapped. "There are cameras everywhere." Except when they pulled the footage, every angle of the hallway during that exact window showed the same thing, static. White noise. A distortion across all feeds like interference from an old television set. The glitch lasted 98 seconds. When the video returned, the cell was empty. "He planned this," someone whispered. "No," another officer said. "He couldn't have known where we kept him. He couldn't have gotten tools. He couldn't..." But the words collapsed under their own weight. Logic couldn't keep up with the evidence. And the evidence pointed towards something more deliberate, more calculated, more prepared than any of them wanted to admit. The building went into lockdown, doors sealed, exits blocked, streets outside filled with squad cars. Sirens pierced the city, echoing off old stone facades. Rumors spread faster than the officers could contain them. He escaped. He disappeared. He walked out without leaving footprints. He slipped between frames of reality. People said anything when fear outran reason. The lead investigator ordered a full sweep. Officers searched bathrooms, storage closets, air ducts, stairwells, the rooftop, the underground parking garage. Nothing. The suspect didn't leave fingerprints, didn't leave footprints, didn't leave hair fibers, skin cells, anything. His presence vanished as cleanly as her disappearance in 1997. The investigator stood at the cell door, gripping the metal frame so tightly his knuckles whitened. The suspect's final words echoed in his mind. "Every story that ends begins somewhere else." A detective approached. "Sir, we found something." They led him to the interview room. The photograph, the one showing the blurred face of a child, now lay on the table. But someone had altered it. Not with ink. Not with tearing. With precision. A small mark had been scratched beneath the child's blurred face, a symbol identical to the one in the notebook. The same curved mark etched so delicately it was almost invisible. He was here again, the detective whispered, after he escaped. The investigator's breath caught in his throat. How could he re-enter the interrogation room without passing guards, without unlocking doors, without triggering alarms? It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But the key lay on the table, the same key found near the forest where her body had been discovered. Only now the scratch across the bow had deepened, as if someone had traced a second stroke across it. And under the new lighting, the scratch was unmistakable. A number, not a 3, not an 8, a 2. Unit 32. The storage unit next to the one they had opened. Officers rushed back to the abandoned storage facility at the industrial district. Floodlights illuminated the decayed exterior as teams spread inside, shouting unit numbers over radios. The corridor felt colder this time, as if the building had inhaled the moment the suspect escaped. Unit 32, someone called out. The lock resisted at first, stiff, rust-eaten, but with a grunt and a shove, the door groaned open. Flashlights swept the darkness. The air inside was stale, heavy, thick with the smell of mold and something faintly metallic. Dust coated everything. Cardboard boxes collapsed into themselves. A broken stool lay on its side. Old newspapers littered the floor. Headlines faded into illegibility. At first glance, there was nothing unusual, nothing incriminating. Then one of the officers froze. Is that? In the center of the room sat a small wooden table, dust-free, recently wiped, impossibly out of place in the ruined unit. On the table sat a single object, a glass jar. Inside the jar, pressed neatly against the surface, was a fragment of purple fabric. Not from the scarf, from something else entirely. Beside the jar lay the missing notebook page. The page was intact. Handwriting stretched across it in the same careful ink, but the words were different now. Tighter, sharper, almost frantic. She noticed the pattern. She walked the same path. Same time, same hesitation, same last glance. She knew the rhythm. She knew the echo. She understood the shadow before it reached her. And beneath the writing, a final line burned into the page with the pressure of a hand that pressed too hard. I wasn't the only one watching. The investigators choked on the realization. A second watcher, a second presence. A second set of eyes on her in 1997, and the blurred face in the photograph, childlike, pale, unrecognized, suddenly mattered more than anything the suspect had said. The forensic analyst arrived, breathless lab coat, half-buttoned hair tied back messily. She held the missing child report, the one filed 8 days before the girl disappeared. This child was last seen near the riverside, she said, near where he took the photograph. Same week, same location. Did the child know her? Someone asked. We don't know. Did the suspect take the child? Another officer asked. We don't know. What happened to the child? The lead detective demanded. We don't know. The words echoed like gunshots. An officer stepped deeper into Unit 32, scanning the back wall. There's something here. Another flashlight swung. A section of the metal wall glinted strangely. The officer brushed away dust, revealing scratches etched into the metal lines, crossing, looping, intersecting. At first random, then unmistakably deliberate, a diagram of the bridge. The same bridge where the scarf was found. And next to it, 2 figures. Not stick figures. Not drawings. Just crude outlines, one tall, one small, both facing the railing. The lead investigator felt sweat bead across his forehead. Why would he carve this? Someone whispered. The forensic analyst shook her head. These scratches, they're different, deeper, older. How old? She hesitated. Possibly from the late 90s. The room became a vacuum. The air tightened. He's been here, the lead detective murmured. Long before she vanished. Another officer swallowed hard, or someone else was. But before questions could turn into theories, another discovery pulled the ground out from beneath them, a camera tripod lying in the far corner. Ancient, rusted, broken in half. But the model, a 1990s amateur photography tripod, matched the era of the film negatives found earlier. The lead detective's heart dropped. He wasn't the one taking the pictures. Silence, heavy, smothering. Someone else had held the camera. Someone else had followed her. Someone else had stood behind the lens during those unnerving photographs. And the suspect, whoever he really was, wasn't alone. They rushed out of the unit, radios crackling with commands, boots thudding down the hallway. Officers spread across the desolate industrial district, scanning rooftops, alleys, broken windows. The suspect couldn't have gotten far, not on foot, not without transportation, not without being caught on a dozen traffic cameras. But as they reached the street, the first officer stopped so abruptly the others almost collided with him. There, sitting in the middle of the cracked pavement under the glow of a flickering street lamp, was the suspect. Sitting cross-legged, calm, waiting. He didn't run, didn't hide, didn't appear winded. It was as if he had been sitting there the entire time, watching them enter Unit 32, waiting for them to understand. Officers surrounded him instantly, guns raised, shouting commands. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even look at the guns. He looked only at the lead investigator, then at the storage facility door behind him, then back at the investigator. "You opened the wrong unit first," he said quietly. The detective's pulse pounded. "There's someone else involved. Someone who was there that night." The suspect nodded slowly. Finally. "Who are they?" the detective demanded. A soft smile touched the suspect's lips, frighteningly calm, almost proud. "She noticed me," he said, "but she noticed them first." A tremor ran through the officers. "Where is this person now?" the detective barked. The suspect raised his eyes to the night sky, exhaling as if releasing a secret held too long. "Some shadows," he murmured, "don't stay children forever." The street fell silent. No one dared breathe. And far above them, at the top of an abandoned factory building, a small silhouette stood in the darkness, watching, unmoving, waiting. For a moment, no one on the street moved. Not the officers with their guns raised, not the lead investigator gripping his radio so tightly the plastic creaked, not even the suspect sitting calmly in the center of the cracked asphalt. All eyes were drawn upward toward the silhouette perched atop the abandoned factory roof, small, still backlit by the faint glow of a flickering security light. The outline was unmistakably human, but too slender, too small to be an adult. The scale was wrong, the posture was wrong, and the stillness so absolute it felt unnatural, sent a ripple of unease through the assembled officers. One of them whispered, "Is that a child?" Another muttered, "Impossible." But the lead investigator didn't say anything. His breath hitched his thoughts, spiraling back to the blurred figure in the photograph. The missing person case filed 8 days before the girl vanished. The suspect's chilling words, "Some shadows don't stay children forever." "Don't move," the investigator warned the suspect. The suspect smiled faintly. "You still think I'm the one you need to contain." He didn't look at the officers. He didn't look at the guns. He looked only at the rooftop, as if waiting for something. The investigator raised his flashlight and angled it upward. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing more, the figure's arms hanging too straight, too stiff. The head tilted slightly to one side. The clothes, simplistic dark shirt, dark pants, no reflective material. And the eyes, two small, perfectly round points of reflected light, shining back like an animal watching from the shadows. "Identify yourself," an officer shouted. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react at all. The investigator stepped forward, voice trembling but controlled. "If you can hear me come down from the roof, you are not in trouble. We just want to talk." The figure remained frozen. The suspect let out a soft breath. They don't respond to commands. "Shut up," an officer snapped. But the suspect wasn't listening. His gaze never left the rooftop. They were always quiet, even in 1997. That sentence lifted the hairs on the investigator's arms. "Who are they?" he demanded. The suspect whispered, "Someone who never learned how to leave a moment behind." The figure remained motionless as officers began positioning ladders, forming containment lines, coordinating rooftop access. The air smelled of rust and cold wind as the industrial district seemed to shrink around them, its silence suffocating. The lead investigators signaled 2 officers to flank the building and climb the metal fire escape. They ascended cautiously, radios crackling with clipped whispers. From the ground, the figure appeared unmoved by the approaching officers. Halfway up, one officer reported no visible movement, but something feels off, proceeding slow. The suspect tilted his head slightly. "Don't go up there." The investigator turned sharply. "Why not?" "They don't like being approached." A shiver of dread slid through the group. The officer on the fire escape froze. Sir? The investigator tightened his grip on the radio. Continue with caution. The suspect sighed, almost regretful. Your caution doesn't matter. Before the officers reached the roof's edge, the silhouette shifted its head, turning unnaturally smooth, its body pivoting in a single fluid motion. Not fast, but wrong, like joints bending with no sound, no resistance. The officers froze as the figure leaned forward slightly, staring directly down at them. Stop, the investigator shouted. The figure stepped backward and disappeared from view. A gasp shot through the group. It's running movie, the lead investigator yelled. Officers swarmed toward the building, boots pounding the pavement, radios erupting. The suspect remained on the ground, hands calmly folded. On the rooftop, flashlights scattered beams into the night, officers sweeping across rusted metal sheets and crumbling tar. But the rooftop was empty. No door had opened. No ladder had dropped. No edge showed signs of descent. It was as if the figure dissolved into the air. Negative visual, an officer shouted. Repeat, no contact. Impossible, another yelled. They were right here. The investigator ran a hand down his face, fighting the rising panic. The suspect slowly got to his feet, still not attempting to flee. You're looking in the wrong place, he said. The detective spun toward him. Where did they go? The suspect pointed calmly toward the storage facility corridor. They don't run. They return. Officers raced back inside. The corridor echoed with footsteps, flashlights dancing across the metal doors. Dust clouds drifted lazily in the air as officers checked each unit. Then someone shouted, Sir, Unit 36 door is open. The investigator rushed over. The door stood ajar, lock dangling like it had been lifted effortlessly. Inside the unit was nearly empty. A single wooden chair sat at the center. On it, folded neatly, was a small shirt, child-sized, gray, paper-thin with age. And pinned to it with a rusty thumbtack was a photograph. The same girl, same river, same scarf. But this time, the perspective was different. She wasn't being watched from afar. She was standing close, almost too close, and smiling directly into the camera as if engaging with the person behind it. Behind her, faint in the blurred background, was the tall silhouette the investigators recognized as the suspect. And beside him, barely visible, half blocked by motion blur, was the small figure. Not a child, but no longer exactly human in posture. Almost like something caught between growth and stillness. The lead detective stared at the photograph, heart pounding. He wasn't alone when he followed her, he murmured. She wasn't alone when she disappeared. Someone whispered behind him, is that the missing child from the report? The forensic analyst stepped forward, eyes wide. Yes, but the proportions are wrong. Look at the arms. Look at the neck. Another officer whispered, what happened to them? No one had an answer. The suspect was escorted inside, still eerily cooperative, and forced to look at the photograph. He examined it for a long time, expression unreadable. Then he closed his eyes. They shouldn't have taken this picture, he said quietly. Who is this? The detective demanded, pointing at the small figure. The suspect's voice was barely a whisper. Someone she noticed too early. Someone who noticed her noticing. The detective's pulse roared in his ears. Where are they now? The suspect opened his eyes. Here. Where? In the story you're not ready to finish. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. The investigator took a slow breath. Did you take the child? The suspect's jaw tightened to the first sign of tension since his arrest. No. Did the child witness what you did? No. Then what's the connection? The suspect stared toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the storage facility. Connections aren't always linear. Some run sideways. The investigator slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Who are they? What do they want? Why were they there? The suspect leaned forward, whispering because they always returned to the moment they were lost. A chill ran through every officer in the room. The forensic analyst suddenly gasped. Sir, the child went missing 8 days before the girl vanished. The investigator froze. And the suspect's notebook entries begin exactly 8 days before the disappearance. The implication hit like a blow. The child didn't appear during the girl's final days by accident. They appeared when the suspect first noticed her. 2 watchers, 2 disappearances, 2 timelines converging on the same fractured path. Before anyone could speak, a radio crackled violently. Sir, movement detected in the main corridor, small figure, heading toward exit. Officers sprinted into position, weapons drawn, adrenaline surging. The corridor lights flickered. Shadows warped across the walls. Then silence. Dead silence. Until an officer whispered, voice cracking, "They're standing right behind us." The entire corridor turned as one. At the far end, illuminated by a single dying bulb, stood the figure. Small, still, waiting. Their head-tilted eyes reflecting light like polished glass. Not a child. Not anymore. Something stretched by time, pressed thin by years of wandering in the edges of memory. One step forward. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. The officers froze. The suspect whispered from behind the glass of the interview room, voice trembling for the first time. They always returned to the moment they noticed her. The figure took another step. The lights flickered. The storage facility groaned like something alive. And the investigation, once a simple cold case, crossed into a territory no one was trained to navigate. Not criminal. Not logical. Something else entirely. Something that wasn't done watching. Not yet. They didn't fire. No one gave the order. No one dared move fast enough to break whatever fragile thread held the corridor together. In that moment, the small figure at the far end stood under the buzzing light, head-tilted arms, hanging loose eyes, reflecting the white glare like twin shards of glass. The air felt denser around them, like the storage facility had sucked in a breath and was holding it, waiting to see who would move first. Radios crackled, boots shifted, muzzles trembled a few millimeters, but no one took that first step. The lead investigator's voice came out low and strained. "Nobody shoots. Nobody moves without my order." His heart hammered, each beat sounding too loud in his ears. The headline already wrote itself in his mind. Bilbao cold case reopens, nightmare corridor officers. Face unknown figure in crime scene relic. He swallowed it down and forced his brain back into procedure. Unknown individual, possible witness, possible suspect, possible something else. "Identify yourself," he called down the hallway. His voice traveled, hitting the metal walls and returning in fragments. "Come forward slowly, hands visible, now." The figure did not obey. Instead, they raised one hand. Slowly, delicately. Like someone replaying a gesture they'd done 1,000 times in a different life. The hand lifted to chest height, then stopped. Fingers curled inward, palm turning toward the body. A small, almost imperceptible wave. Not greeting. Not surrender. Recognition. An officer whispered behind the investigator. "They're waving, like they know us." The suspect, standing at the observation window of the interview room with 2 officers on either side, watched with wide, unblinking eyes. For the first time, his posture wasn't composed. It was tense, anticipatory, like someone watching a long-delayed scene finally catch up to the timeline in his head. "They're not here for you," he murmured. The lead investigator forced himself forward one step, then another. His boots echoed in the corridor, each sound bouncing back to him, distorted, stretched thin. "Stay where you are," he repeated, though the words now felt more like a plea than a command. The figure did something then that no one expected. They mimicked him, one small step forward. Their foot landed exactly in rhythm with his. Shivers traveled up spines. It was like watching a reflection move out of sync, a mirror image that had learned to walk on its own. The corridor seemed to narrow around them, the distance between the officers and the figure shrinking and stretching simultaneously, perception warping under nerves. "Sir, step back," an officer hissed. "This isn't—" The investigator raised a hand, silencing him. If this was fear, it was the kind that tasted like metal, but inside that fear was something else: anger. At the suspect. At the years. At the cold case that refused to stay where it belonged, on a shelf in a file behind a label that read "Unsolved." He took another step. The figure did too. Behind the glass, the suspect whispered, "You're walking into someone else's memory. They'll let you in, but they won't let you leave the same." The forensic analyst appeared at the far end of the corridor, voice tight. "Sir, we've got new information on the child case you need to." She stopped when she saw the figure. Her file slipped from her grip, papers spilling across the floor like a second layer of ghosts. "That's them," she breathed. "That's the child from the report." The lead investigator didn't look away from the figure. They're not a child anymore. 2 more steps, 2 more perfectly synchronized movements. Up close now, the details became clearer. The body was small, but not proportioned like a child's. Limbs a fraction too long, shoulders a fraction too narrow. Clothes that might once have been sized for a younger frame now hung wrong, stretched by years and weather. The face was partially obscured by strands of hair, but what they could see made their stomachs twist. Features frozen in an expression that wasn't quite neutral, not quite sad, as if the muscles had forgotten how to choose. The eyes were the worst part. Dead still. Over alert. Old. Do you know who we are? The investigator asked softly now. Calm. Coaxing. The tone he used with fragile witnesses on the brink of shutting down. We're here about what happened in 1997. We're here about the girl near the river. We believe you were there. We believe you saw something. We just want to understand. The figure tilted their head more. The movement creaked in the silence. Then, very slowly, they lifted their other hand, the one that had been hanging slack, and pointed. Not at the investigator. Not at the officers. At the suspect behind the glass. The corridor seemed to tilt. Every breath hitched. Every nerve snapped tight. The suspect's knees buckled. The officers on either side grabbed him, steadying him, but he barely seemed to notice. His eyes locked on the pointing hand, his face draining of color. They remember, he whispered. After all this time, they still remember. The investigator seized on it. You know them, he said sharply, whipping around to face the suspect through the glass. Who are they? Tell me now. What's their connection to her? The suspect's voice trembled. They weren't meant to be part of this. They were a leftover. A witness nobody counted on. Witness to what the investigator snapped. What did you do in 1997? Silence. Then the suspect answered with 3 words that made the entire hallway flinch. We weren't alone. The figure shifted again, hand still raised, still pointing at him. Then, without warning, they turned and walked away. Not fast. Not running. Just turning toward the exit at the far end of the corridor, moving with a measured, almost mechanical stride. Each step sounded like a memory replaying itself, distant, muffled, already decided. Stop them, an officer yelled. The spell shattered. Boots thundered, officers lunged forward. The corridor exploded into motion. But as they closed the distance, the lights flickered violently, plunging everything into staccato darkness and light. On, off, on, off. In one flash, the figure was there. In the next, the corridor was empty. They reached the exit door at a sprint, shoulder slamming it open. Cold night air rushed in. Outside, the industrial yard gaped wide and bare under security lights. No footprints, no motion, no doors swinging. No dark silhouettes scaling fences. Nothing. Negative visual. Someone shouted again, this time with raw panic under the words. They just vanished. The investigator stood in the doorway, hands on the frame, breathing hard. The night wind cut through his clothes, bringing with it the faint smell of the nearby river. For a second, he wasn't in the industrial district anymore. He was on the bridge in 1997, standing over a purple scarf on a railing, knowing something had slipped out of the world without leaving a map behind. Lock this place down, he ordered quietly, voice stripped of any illusion of control. No one moves alone. Cameras on every entrance, every corridor, and I want every frame reviewed, every pixel. Behind the glass, the suspect slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, arms folded around his knees like someone much smaller than his body. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't taunting. He looked tired. The forensic analyst, still clutching the missing child report, approached the investigator. You need to hear this now, she said, before anything else disappears. He nodded, jaw tight. She opened the file, flipping to the original handwritten report from 1997. The missing child reported by a neighbor, not a parent. Parents were unavailable, according to the officer. No follow-up, no media coverage. Just a line in the log and a closed file. Name, the investigator asked. She hesitated. That's the thing, the name field is smudged. Water damage. We can't read it. Only the first letter looks like an S. The photo attached is the same child as in the negative. It's them. Definitely them. Report location near the river, same general area where she was last seen. Witness said the child was seen staring at the water for an unusually long time, then walking away with someone tall. The investigator's voice dropped. Description of the tall person. She swallowed. Dark coat, medium build, no face remembered, just tall. He didn't have to say it. Everyone thought it. The suspect. The analyst continued. But there's one more note. The officer who took the report wrote that the child seemed confused about time, kept saying they had already been there, kept repeating that they were waiting for a girl in a purple scarf. The corridor's hum seemed to die. The investigator turned back toward the empty stretch of hallway where the figure had stood moments earlier. They were waiting for her, he said slowly, before she even disappeared. The suspect lifted his head, eyes hollow. They were always early. The investigator stalked back to the glass, rage and dread mixing in his veins. What did you do to them? He demanded. What did you do to that child? The suspect's throat bobbed. Nothing. That's the problem. Then what did you see? His answer came like confession and accusation at once. I saw someone else watching her before I did. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Someone else, the forensic analyst repeated. As in, a third person. The suspect nodded slowly. You think I'm the shadow that matters, but I wasn't the first one there. They were. And they weren't alone. Who? The investigator pressed. The suspect looked past him, eyes unfocused, like he was staring back through years back, to that night, back to the river and the bridge and the purple scarf that hadn't yet been left on the rail. You're chasing a headline that says cold case solved, he said softly. But all you've done is drag every unsolved moment of that night back into the light. And some things never learned how to live in daylight. The investigator's patience snapped. She died, he hissed. Her family left this city broken. This community lived with fear for 27 years. I don't care how poetic you think you sound. Give me names. Give me actions. Give me anything we can hold. The suspect met his eyes. There was no smugness there now, just a bottomless exhaustion. You already have what you need, he said. Locks, keys, units, bridges, children who vanish into corridors. You're looking in the right places with the wrong questions. And what's the right question? The investigator shot back. The suspect's reply was almost inaudible, but everyone in the corridor heard it. Why did she notice us before we touched her life? The forensic analyst whispered she knew. She knew something was wrong before that night. The investigator thought of the entries in the notebook marked with that curved symbol. Awareness. Glances over the shoulder. Keys between fingers. Reflexes sharpened by an instinct she couldn't articulate. She noticed. She walked through the city like someone reading headlines. Only she could see. Unseen presence follows woman home. Unknown pattern repeats each night near river. Shadow watches from second floor window. Somewhere between those invisible headlines and the real one. Bilbao, 1997 cold case solved, surprise arrest rattles entire community. A truth waited still unsolved. Still breathing. And as the officers sealed the storage facility, as the strange figure vanished from their cameras as thoroughly as the suspect had vanished from his cell, as the city above continued turning without knowing a second story had burst open beneath its streets. One thing became clear. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a story about who sees who is seen and what refuses to stay buried once it has been noticed, even if no one is ready for what that noticing brings back. The night after the figure vanished from the corridor, the station felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with flickering lights or glitched camera feeds. It was quieter, but not with the calm of a shift winding down. It was the quiet of people afraid to speak too loudly in case something heard them. Radios stayed on even when no one was talking. Coffee sat untouched on desks. The usual gossip, the dark humor that normally patched the gaps between cases, had evaporated. Every conversation circled back to the same words. The girl, the child, the bridge, the scarf, the unit, the shadow. And underneath all of it, like a headline none of them dared to read out loud, this was no longer just a cold case. It was something that made the idea of solved feel like a lie. The lead investigator didn't go home. He sat in the archive room at 3 a.m, surrounded by stacks of boxes pulled from storage, not just the girl's case, but every disappearance in the region from that year. Every possible runaway, every unconfirmed sighting, every file closed with a shrug and a signature. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, turning his exhaustion into a kind of numb clarity. He spread photos across the table faces of people who had walked out of sight and never stepped back into the frame again. He found her file again and opened it as if for the first time. She stared out from the photograph, mid-laugh, hair pulled back, eyes bright in a way that now felt almost accusatory. The details were all there. Last seen leaving the cafe scarf around her neck. Route home, mapped and remapped family statements, friend interviews, grainy shots of the bridge, that empty patch of railing that would soon become infamous. But it was the smaller folder beneath that caught his attention this time, a thin bundle of pages labeled with a word that had always felt perfunctory personal effects. Inside were the things she had left behind in her room, not the obvious, not the passport, or the school records, or the photographs of holidays on the coast. The officers in 1997 had bagged and tagged only what seemed maybe relevant and still manageable. A small notebook, a handful of bus tickets, a flyer from a local gallery, a folded map of the city with a path traced across it in blue pen. He opened the notebook first. The handwriting was neat, compact, the entries brief. Not a diary in the traditional sense, more like observations, short lines, fragments, headlines she wrote for herself as if narrating a private version of her life. Same man in the cafe again today. Feels like someone 2 steps behind me on narrow streets. Keys between fingers, equal sign ridiculous but comforting. Bridge feels different at night. Not dangerous. Just watched. The investigator's skin prickled. These weren't the thoughts of someone paranoid without cause. These were the notes of someone who had learned to trust her instincts. Someone trying to turn the shapeless unease of being observed into words she could at least see on paper. Further down the page, the entries got stranger. Small figure near river wall 3 days in a row. Doesn't move much. Always there before I arrive. Child, or just small. Hard to tell from distance. Today, they looked at me like they've been waiting. He set the notebook down slowly. His heart pounded with a dull, heavy intensity. She had seen them. The figure from the corridor, from the photograph, from the missing child report. She had seen them before any officer had a name for what they were, before the suspect ever put her into his notebook. On the last page, written in a slightly shakier hand, was a line that didn't match the others. No description, no detail, just a sentence squeezed into the margin. If something happens, it won't be random. He exhaled a rough, tired sound. She had known. Not what, not when, not how. But she had known that whatever was moving toward her was not accident, not chaos, pattern, intention. A rhythm she could feel but not step out of. He picked up the map next. Blue ink traced the regular route Cafe Plaza Bridge home. A path walked so many times the pen line had gone over itself until it thickened into a dark blue road. But there were other marks. 2 small circles at corners. Arrows pointing to vantage points, windows and benches, alley mouths. Under one arrow near the riverside, she had written a single word, Watcher. He flipped the map. On the back, in the same neat hand, 3 words, not always him. The corridor scene replayed in his mind, the figure pointing not at the officers, not at the bridge, not at the past, but at the suspect behind the glass. The suspect insisting he wasn't the first. The missing child seen staring at the river, waiting for a girl in a purple scarf before she had officially vanished. The storage units with their carved diagrams and unspoken timelines. He gathered the notebook, the map, the child's file, and the suspect's notebook into a single stack and carried them to the interview room. The suspect sat there again now, handcuffed this time, 2 guards within arm's reach, but that same uncanny stillness wrapped around him like a second skin. He looked up as the investigator entered, not curious, not nervous, just present. You kept a notebook on her, the investigator said, dropping the items onto the table, but she kept one too. The suspect's eyes flicked to the worn cover, then back to the investigator's face. Of course she did, he said. She noticed things. She noticed you. Yes, she noticed them. The suspect's jaw moved a tiny clench. Yes, and she knew something was coming. The suspect's gaze fell to the final margin note the investigator had turned toward him. The words seemed to bruise the air between them. If something happens, it won't be random. His throat worked once, as if swallowing something bitter. She was right, he whispered. The investigator leaned in, palms flat on the table. Let's forget the riddles for a moment, forget the metaphors, forget the poetic nonsense. I don't care about your philosophy. I care about the bridge, the forest, the scarf, the child, the way you walked behind her, the way someone else watched before you did. You keep talking about the story not belonging to just you. Fine. Then tell me who else wrote it. The suspect looked at him for a long time. The hum of the ventilation system grew loud in the silence. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and went unanswered. You won't like the answer, he said finally. Try me. The suspect's fingers twitched against the metal of the cuffs. You're asking for a name, he said. Something you can write in a report? Someone you can arrest? Something you can put after the words cold case solved, so the headline feels complete. That would be a start, the investigator replied. But what if the name doesn't sit cleanly under suspect? The man continued. What if it doesn't sit anywhere you've seen them now? They're not a child anymore. Not really. Not an adult either. There's something that happened to your city and never left. The investigator's voice sharpened. What were they in 1997? The suspect closed his eyes, a scared child with the wrong instincts at the right time. He opened them again, and now there was something raw there, something that cut through the practiced calm. I saw her by the river first, he said. The girl. She was walking alone. Everyone else passed her like she was just another moving piece in their day, but she walked like she heard something no one else did, like every footstep had weight. The investigator said nothing. I started watching her because of that, the suspect continued. I thought I was the only one who noticed, until I saw them. Small, silent, always ahead, never behind. Always at the edge of where she was going to be, not where she was. The child, he nodded. They watched the same way she did, noticing everything, reacting to details no one else would care about. Patterns, routines, timing. They were afraid, but not of me. Not at first. They were afraid of missing the moment. What moment? The investigator snapped. When she would finally look back and see them, the suspect said. He leaned closer, voice dropping. You think I hunted her. And maybe you're not wrong. But before I ever stepped into her path, there were two people who had already woven her into their lives. A child who waited for her by the river, and a girl who felt every set of eyes that lingered a second too long. The investigator glanced at the map again, at the word written beneath the arrow watcher. Not always him. You followed both of them, he said. Yes. Why? Because I wanted to understand why they moved toward each other instead of away, the suspect answered. Why a girl who knew danger when she felt it kept walking the same route anyway. Why a child who should have run chose to stand by the water and wait. The investigator's voice went hard. And the night she disappeared, the suspect's fingers tightened. I saw her cross the plaza, he said. She was earlier than usual. The scarf was new, purple. I was 3 corners behind. They were already at the bridge. You saw them together, for a moment, his eyes unfocused, staring through the table. She stopped at the railing. They stood a few meters away, not talking, not touching, just standing in the same frame. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the city held its breath. And then the investigator pushed. The suspect's voice softened to a fragile thread. She looked back. First at me, then at them. And in that second, I realized something terrible. She wasn't surprised. His words hung between them. She knew you both, the investigator said. She knew the pattern, the suspect corrected. She may not have had names, but she knew the roles. Shadow 1, Shadow 2, the one behind, the one ahead, the one. His gaze sharpened suddenly. You want me to say I grabbed her? Dragged her off the bridge, left the scarf as some twisted signature. But that would be your story, not mine. The investigator's jaw clenched. Then tell me yours. The suspect swallowed. I reached the bridge. She was gone. The scarf was on the rail. They were standing exactly where you saw them in the corridor. And for the first time, they looked at me like I was late. The room seemed to tilt. You didn't take her? The investigator said slowly. No. Then who did? The suspect shook his head. You're still thinking in singular terms. One perpetrator, one victim, one witness. What happened that night wasn't a simple crime. It was a convergence. 3 people who had been circling each other finally occupying the same piece of space-time. The investigator's patience frayed again. Space-time, is that your defense now? It's my description, the suspect shot back, sudden steel in his tone. Ask your cameras about it. Ask your glitch. Ask the child who appears where they shouldn't. Your technology's just catching up to what that night did to them. The forensic analyst, silent until now, spoke from the back of the room. The missing child file says they kept saying they'd already been at the river. Her voice was barely audible, like they were trapped in the same moment. The suspect looked at her. For the first time, his expression held something like respect. Exactly, he said. He doesn't like the word, but you should use it anyway. Trap. The investigator straightened. So who said it? The suspect's answer came without pause. Whichever of us first decided to watch instead of walk away. They don't restart the interviews right away. For the first time since the arrest, the investigators admit something they'd never say into a microphone. The usual script doesn't fit. There is no straightforward confession to pry loose, no clear suspect hierarchy to lean on. No familiar pattern of motive means opportunity they can chart on a whiteboard and slowly fill with photographs and red string. Instead, there's a dead girl who saw too much, a man who watched her watching, and a missing child who keeps appearing in places they shouldn't be able to reach. Somewhere in the overlap is the headline the city thinks it wants cold case solved. Somewhere else just to the side of that is the truth. The lead investigator stands again on the bridge where it started, where the scarf lay, where the city first realized something could vanish without a sound. The river moves sluggishly beneath black and indifferent, reflecting only thin slices of streetlight. The forensic analyst walks beside him, hands in her pockets, the girl's notebook tucked under one arm, the suspect's under the other. Traffic hums a few streets away. But here at this hour, the bridge feels like it did in every photograph, half abandoned, held in a space between one day and the next. We've been doing this wrong, she says quietly. He doesn't look at her. Enlighten me. We keep treating that night like an event, she replies. Start time and time, cause effect. But everyone involved talks about it like a place, like something you step into and then struggle to leave. He huffs a humorless breath. If you tell me time is a circle, I swear. I'm telling you, we might need to treat it like a crime scene that never stopped existing, she interrupts. We keep reopening the file. Maybe the file never closed. He leans on the railing, thumb rubbing unconsciously over a rusted patch. You sound like him. I sound like the data, she says. The cameras glitch at specific timestamps. The figure appears in corridors and storage units and rooftops, but only when we recreate certain conditions. The suspect's notes obsess over patterns, not actions. Her notebook does the same. They were all tracking rhythm, not events. He finally turns toward her. So what do you propose? She opens the girl's map, smoothing it against the railing, exactly where the handwritten word sits, watcher. We stop chasing ghosts and we reconstruct the rhythm, she says. Same route, same time, same angles, same vantage points. We walk what she walked, watch. What she watched, stand where they both stood. And we see what refuses to stay in the past. His jaw tightens, but he doesn't dismiss it. The worst part is that it makes sense. Back at the station, he lays out the plan, and it sounds more like an exorcism than a procedure. Recreate the night. Use the suspect, the notebooks, the surviving data. Not as theater, as calibration. Some officers balk. Some scoff. Some are too unnerved to argue. The city prosecutor will never authorize something this experimental formally, so they keep it off the books. No memos, no directives, no signatures, just a small team, an unofficial exercise, and a hope that whatever is stuck in 1997 might be coaxed into giving up another inch of truth. They tell the suspect they're taking him back to the bridge. He doesn't resist, doesn't gloat. He just nods slowly like someone agreeing to return to a childhood home that was never safe. It's not the bridge that matters, he says as they cuff his hands. It's the order of the steps. Then you'll help us with the choreography, the investigator says. The walk begins at the cafe on the edge of Plaza Nueva, long since renovated, but the bones of the place still the same. New chairs, new paint, same door, same sightlines. Closing hour. Staff stack chairs, wipe tables, roll down the blinds. The girl isn't here to stand up, put on her scarf, say goodnight. But the investigator positions himself where she used to sit, using the notebook and witness statements as script. Time, he asks. 22:05. The analyst replies, eyes on her watch. She left between 10 past and 12 past most nights. He stands, steps outside. The suspect walks a few paces behind, bracketed by 2 officers. No one is comfortable with how natural he looks retracing her route. He points once, almost absently. She always looked left first, he says, checking the square, counting faces, one of her quiet habits. Not in your notes, the analyst says sharply. He glances at her. You didn't have my whole notebook. They move through the plaza. The investigator tries to match the cadence the witness described, unhurried but deliberate, like someone who likes walking but knows the streets well enough not to linger in blind corners. The analyst murmurs landmarks under her breath, cross-referencing with the girl's scribbled annotations. Corner shop, alley mouth, street lamp that flickers. They pause at each spot she circled on the map, turn their heads at the same angles. The city at night isn't the same as it was in 1997. New signs, different sounds, LED where sodium once burned. But beneath the upgrades, the geometry persists. Distances, corners, lines of sight, the feeling of being visible or unseen. At the second corner, the analyst checks the time. 22:10, she says. Her watch stopped at 22:11 when it was recovered. We're close. They hear the river before they see it, dull, constant, like a city breathing in its sleep. The bridge emerges ahead precisely where the map says it should. The suspect's shoulders draw in just barely. This is where I used to fall back, he says. Give her space. I didn't like being close on the approach. The investigator stops and turns. Why, he holds his gaze for a moment. Because someone else was always closer. They step onto the bridge. The analyst's skin prickles instantly. The air feels a degree colder, a degree heavier. It's stupid, she tells herself. It's the wind, the open space, the expectation. But her pulse doesn't agree. She moves to the spot marked on the map. The investigator takes the rough position the girl's shoe impression suggested. The suspect stands a few meters back under the eye of his escorts. The rest of the team spreads to the edges, some watching the river, some scanning the street, some pointedly avoiding looking anywhere except at their own boots. Time, the investigator says. 22:11, the analyst replies. Right now is the last timestamp we can anchor her to. Everything after this is disappearance and reconstruction. The investigator grips the cold rail. The metal feels too solid, too permanent to have failed at holding someone inside this world. He forces his voice steady. According to you, he says to the suspect, she stopped here, looked back at you, then at them. Show me exactly how. The suspect obeys. He takes a measured step forward, sets his stance, lifts his head. For a heartbeat, there's nothing remarkable about it. A man standing on a bridge. Then the angle of his gaze locks onto something just past the investigator's shoulder. There, he says quietly. That's where they were. The investigator doesn't want to look. He looks anyway. At first, there's nothing. Empty stretch of pavement, graffiti scuffed wall, a lamppost buzzing lazily. The analyst shifts, following his line of sight. See what she starts to say. The lights glitch. It's not dramatic. No showers of sparks, no blackout. Just a micro-stutter light strobing too fast for comfort shadows, jumping half a step sideways. The sound of the river warps like someone dragging a finger across a spinning record. Radios hiss. For a fraction of a second, no one hears their own breathing. Then they see it. Not appearing, not arriving, just there, as if they'd finally tuned to the right frequency. A small shape at the far end of the bridge, half in lamplight, half in shadow. Head tilted, arms loose, eyes reflecting. The figure from the corridor. The missing child who isn't a child anymore. Standing exactly where the suspect pointed. Exactly where the girl had written "Watcher." No one moves. The investigator's heart slams against his ribs. Beside him, the analyst goes pale, her hand tightening around the notebooks until the cardboard creaks. The suspect's breath shudders audibly. "You're repeating the pattern," he whispers. "They're repeating theirs." The figure doesn't advance, doesn't retreat. They do something worse. They raise one hand not to wave, not to point, but to trace something small and invisible in the air, like a child drawing on a fogged window. The motion is strangely precise. It takes the investigator a second to realize what he's seeing. A curve, half a number. The same mark etched into metal, scratched into keys, drawn beside certain lines in the suspect's notebook. The symbol of noticing. The analyst steps forward impulsively. "Wait," she calls voice, shaking but firm. "If you're stuck here, if this moment keeps replaying, you're not the only one. She was in it too. You both were. Tell us what happened. Show us." The figure's head tilts a fraction more as if calibrating. The air grows tighter. The suspect closes his eyes. "This is where it folds," he says. "The night, the river, the bridge. Everything folds here." "Shut up," one officer hisses, but the words don't reach him. He's somewhere else. Somewhere then. The lights glitch again. On, off, on, off. During one black frame, the investigator hears something that doesn't belong to this year laughter. Soft, quick cutoff. A woman's voice saying, I know, overlapping with a distant car horn that's not part of tonight's traffic. When the light returns, he's gripping the railing harder than before, knuckles white, breath ragged. He's not the only one. One younger officer stumbles back, hand over his mouth. "Did you hear?" He starts. "No," the investigator says too quickly. "You heard the wind." But the analyst meets his gaze and he knows she heard it too. The girl's voice slipping through whatever hairline crack they just forced open in the surface of that night. The figure at the end of the bridge lowers their hand, takes a step forward. Each footfall sounds like it lands in 2 times at once. The suspect whispers something too softly to catch, so the investigator snaps, "Say it again." "She never screamed," he says, voice hollow. "You keep expecting a scream. There wasn't one. That's what I remember. That's what never changes." The figure is halfway down the bridge now, pace slow, relentless. With each light stutter for a split second, something else overlaps their outline. Another shape taller, closer to the investigator than the suspect. A shadow, walking out of sync with all of them. For one frame, the girl is there too. Not fully. Not solid. Just a flicker purple at her throat hair pulled back, eyes turned over her shoulder. She's not afraid. She looks resolved. Like someone stepping into a decision she's already made. The analyst chokes on a breath. She came here knowing, she whispers. She knew this moment was going to happen. The figure stops a few meters away, the gap between them charged like a fault line. Up close, the distortions are worse. Lines of the face blur at the edges, posture slightly off like a badly compressed video freezing mid-frame. But the eyes are sharp. Too sharp. "Who took her?" The investigator demands, the words dragged from some raw place. "You were here. You waited for her. You've been coming back to this moment over and over." Who took her? For the first time since any of them have seen them, the figure moves in a way that looks decisively human, shoulders tensing, mouth twitching, something like grief passing over features stretched thin by years. Then they do something no one expects. They lift a hand and point, not at the suspect, not at the investigator, at the railing, at the space just beyond it where the scarf once lay. The investigator feels the world narrow into that gesture. "She jumped," he breathes, horrified. "No. The autopsy, the position of the body." The figure shakes their head once sharply. The gesture is clear, not jumped. "Left." The analyst's mind races. Left how car boat, another person's arms, another time. Who is on the other side, she asks. If she left, who was she going to? The lights stutter. For a heartbeat, they all see it. Another silhouette standing at the far rail where no one stands now. Tall, completely out of step with everyone else's movement. unfamiliar, unnamed. No features, just density, presence. And beside it, for a fraction of a second, the girl's outline not falling, not struggling, reaching. Then the image snaps back to the present. Concrete, water, empty rail. The figure in front of them drops their hand, takes one step backward, another. "Don't go," the analyst blurts, but her voice breaks. The figure looks at her in a way that hurts worse than any accusation. It's not anger, it's apology. For dragging them here, for showing them only enough to fracture what little certainty they had left. The lights glitch one last time. When they return, the bridge is just a bridge again. The figure is gone. The night rushes back in. Cars, wind, the usual hum. The lead investigator slumps against the railing, his body suddenly heavy. The suspect stands very still between his escort's eyes, unfocused lips moving soundlessly as if repeating something only he can hear. The analyst stares at the empty space where the figure stood and sees headlines rearranging themselves in her mind. Not cold case solved. Not surprise arrest rattles entire community. Those feel thin now, like paper laid over a deep crack. Something else rises instead, quieter, truer, far less comforting. Nobody pushed her off the edge of the world. She stepped towards something none of them understand. And somewhere between the city she left behind and the one carrying her ghost, a child got trapped in the doorway and never found a way, all the way through. By the time dawn turns the river from black to dull gray, the footage from the bridge is already in the lab, looping in silence on 3 different monitors. No one wants to watch it alone. They sit together in the darkened viewing room. The lead investigator, the forensic analyst, 2 techs whose job tonight is to make sense of a moment that doesn't seem to obey the usual rules of video or of time. The sound is muted. It doesn't matter. Everyone hears the echo of what they felt when the lights stuttered and the past tried to bleed into the present. On the first pass, the cameras look useless. Glitch after glitch, white noise frames that smear into one another like wet ink. The figure barely registers a distortion at the edge of the bridge, a vertical smudge with 2 hot points where eyes should be. In most frames, they simply aren't there, even though every person in that room remembers watching them walk halfway to the group. Human memory insists on a presence. The recording refuses to commit fully to it. "Freeze at 22:11:12, the analyst says quietly. The tech taps keys. The video stutters, then locks. 1 frame, 1 sliver of borrowed reality. The bridge, the investigator by the rail. The suspect a few paces back, mouth just opening to speak. The analyst with her chin lifted, trying to call something down the length of the bridge that language can't catch. And at the far edge, the figure, not a child, not quite adult, rendered in jagged pixels and broken lines. Head tilted, hand halfway up, marking something in the air. The analyst leans closer. There she whispers, "Look at their hand." The motion blur makes it hard to see, but frame by frame, step by step, you can piece it together, a shape drawn in the empty space. A curve. Not a letter. Not a full number. Just that same half symbol over and over, burned into different surfaces across years. Here it is at last, done in the air, as if the act of noticing has an actual shape. Next frame, the investigator says. Click. The lights on the bridge jump a fraction. Everyone shifts position by a few centimeters. The figure is nearer. For a fraction of a second, another outline ghosts across them, someone taller, impressionistic, like a silhouette remembered in a hurry. The color data smears into a suggestion of purple near the throat. Someone in the room swears softly under their breath. "This won't play in court," one of the techs mutters. "They'll call it corrupted. Artifact. Compression error." They'd be right, the analyst says. But also wrong. The investigator rubs the bridge of his nose. The legal part of his brain is already rewriting this night as something usable, a recreation exercise that produced emotional insight. Nothing more. No clean evidence. No new suspect. No additional forensic link tying the suspect's DNA to the girl's body after the bridge. The case that will go to trial is still the one they had before the reenactment. The scarf, the gloves, the storage unit, the notebooks, The photo, the confession by circumstance of a man who admits he stalked her and never convincingly denies that he might have done more. The story that will go to the city, however, is already writing itself in a different language. Run it again, he says. No pauses. They watch all the way through this time. The approach, the glitch, the figure, the overlapping voices, no microphone records, but everybody remembers. The moment the pointing hand hits the rail, the second shadow at the edge, that impossible suggestion that she didn't fall, didn't get dragged, didn't vanish, she stepped toward someone or something none of them can name. When the video ends, no one speaks for a full minute. Then the analyst says we have enough to convict him. The investigator nods, slowly, jaw tight. We do. Do we have enough to say we understand what happened? She adds. He doesn't answer. The city doesn't wait for nuance. By afternoon, the headline they've always wanted finally lands in red across every news broadcast. Bilbao, 1997. Cold case solved, surprise arrest ends. 27-year mystery. The mugshot of the suspect appears beside a younger photo of the girl, the kind where she's smiling at something outside the frame. Reporters speak in tight, practiced sentences about closure, about justice delayed, about the persistence of modern forensic science. They show shots of the storage units, the gloves, the notebooks. They don't show the corridor. They don't show the figure. They don't play the footage that looks like the city itself is glitching. On talk shows, commentators argue about punishment, about parole, about what solved really means. People call in to say they feel safer now. Others admit they never really believed the case would be cracked. The word cold case is said so many times it loses its edge and becomes just another label in a scrolling bar at the bottom of the screen. At the station, the lead investigator signs paperwork he doesn't fully believe in. Charges, statements, internal reports. In every official document, the sequence is clean suspect, followed victim, suspect handled scarf suspect, stored incriminating items. Suspect monitored her movements. Suspect likely responsible for her death. Likely is doing a lot of work, but the law is used to that. There's enough to take to court, enough to stand on, enough to tell a jury a story that ends with a verdict. In his private notes, the story ends differently. He writes without headings, without dates, just a flowing block of text that looks more like a confession than a report. He writes about rhythm, about roots, about people moving through a city, as though tracing lines invisible to anyone who isn't watching closely. He writes about a girl who felt a pattern tighten around her and walked straight into it anyway. He writes about a man who watched and a child who waited and a moment on a bridge that feels less like a point in time and more like a hinge between realities. He doesn't send that version to anyone. He just folds it and tucks it into the back of the file behind the autopsy and the lab results. It's not evidence. It's a warning. The night before the formal press conference, he goes back to the bridge alone. No reenactment this time. No cameras. No suspect, no analyst, no team. Just him, the river, and the rail that once held a purple scarf between here and gone. The city hums around him, muffled traffic, a distant shout, the low whistle of a train sliding somewhere out of sight. He stands exactly where she once stood because he can't bear not to. You could have gone a different way, he says to the empty air, aware of how ridiculous it is to address a ghost and do it anyway. New route, new time, new city. You felt something wrong in the pattern and kept walking through it. The river doesn't answer. The water carries the history of the last 27 years past like it doesn't care. He waits. Nothing glitches. No figure appears. For a second, he feels relief. Then he realizes that's worse. Back at the station, the forensic analyst is in the evidence room, rechecking every label even though she knows they're right. She stops at the two notebooks, his and hers, and places them side by side. His pages are orderly, meticulous, chilling in their observational distance. Hers are shorter, messier near the end, like someone writing between train stops or phone calls or flashes of adrenaline. On one impulse, she flips them at random and reads whatever lines her eyes land on. His, she looks behind her twice when crossing plaza, like she's counting. Hers twice is not enough. His child returns to Riverwall. Same position, same time, standing like a marker waiting to be noticed. Hers small figure there again. Feels like a question I don't understand. His pattern tightening. Don't know how long before escalation. Hers, if something happens, it won't be random. The analyst snaps the covers shut. It feels like eavesdropping on a conversation that happened across notebooks instead of voices between a watcher and the watched, neither of them fully understanding what they were walking toward. She locks the evidence cabinet, turns out the light. Halfway down the corridor, the motion sensor behind her clicks. The cabinet light flares back on for a second, reflecting weakly off glass and labeled plastic. She tells herself it's just the faulty sensor maintenance has been meaning to fix for months. She doesn't look back to see that one camera feed in one frame at 22:11 exactly, briefly catches a small thin shape standing at the end of the aisle where the shelves create a narrow path no one uses at night. Head tilted, arms loose, watching the lockers that hold the only tangible record of that bridge. The press conference is a performance everyone knows the lines to. Flags behind the podium, microphones angled just so. Cameras red-lighted and hungry. The police chief speaks about perseverance, about modern forensic breakthroughs, about the department's commitment to never abandoning victims of unsolved crimes. The prosecutor outlines the case in language crafted to hit jurors weeks before they're even selected, intentional, premeditated, predatory. Finally brought to justice. The phrase cold case solved is used so often it becomes a mantra. The lead investigator stands to one side out of the direct camera line, watching reporters scribble variations of the same narrative. Bilbao waited 27 years. Bilbao has its answer. Bilbao can finally sleep easier. He knows how badly they all want to believe it. He doesn't blame them. A city cannot live indefinitely, in the space between a question and an answer. People build lives around headlines, not footnotes. When a journalist asks if there were any accomplices, the prosecutor answers confidently, no solid evidence points to any additional perpetrator. This was the work of a single individual. That's where responsibility lies. The analyst's throat tightens. The investigator's jaw flexes. The suspect watching the conference later on a small cell television laughs once. Not loud, not derisive, just one single sound that carries almost no humor at all. That night, the city holds a vigil on the bridge. Candles line the rail where the scarf once lay, wax dripping onto metal that never asked to become a shrine. People who knew her stand beside people who only knew the story. They say her name again and again, as if repeating it can anchor her more firmly in the world. Someone reads a poem. Someone else cries openly. Phones record everything. For a few brittle minutes, grief becomes a public performance and a private wait at the same time. The investigator stands at the back coat collar, turned up, hands in his pockets. The analyst stands beside him. Neither joins the circle. Neither speaks. They just watch. At the far edge of the crowd, near the point where the lamplight dims out and the city's usual darkness resumes, a small shape lingers half in shadow, head tilted, arms loose. No one seems to notice them except the two people who have seen them on a monitor, in a corridor, in a storage unit on the bridge, in a moment that shouldn't exist anymore. You see them, the analyst asks. Yes, the investigator says. Do we go over there? No. They stand still, staring across the distance, and for a second, it feels like the city itself is caught between two frames, one where the cold case is solved and filed, and archived another, where something still walks the old route every night at the same time, waiting for a girl who stepped towards something none of them can see. A breeze passes. Candles flicker. The crowd begins to thin. A news crew packs up its equipment, satisfied that morning looks good on camera. Somewhere, photographers send images to editors who will choose the one where the light hits just right, where the headline "Cold Case Solved" looks most triumphant above teary faces. When the bridge is nearly empty, the investigator finally looks back toward the dim edge. There's nothing there, just an ordinary stretch of pavement, just a railing, just a river carrying away the reflection of the last candle still burning. For a moment, he can almost believe the story they told at the podium is the whole story. Almost. Then he remembers the feeling of the air folding on itself at 22:11, the way the lights hiccuped like the city couldn't decide which version of reality to show them, the ghost of her voice in a glitch no one recorded. And he knows. The file will move to the drawer marked closed. The headline will say solved, but the bridge will still be here tomorrow night at the same time. And so he suspects Will Whatever learned in 1997 how to live in the thin strip of space between being seen and being understood. Months blur after the vigil, not in the way. Time usually blurs with piled up days and routine fatigue, but in the way a story blurs once the ending has been chosen and printed. The suspect is formally charged, arraigned, paraded past cameras as he's led into and out of court. Footage of him walking in handcuffs plays on a loop for a week, slow motion zoomed in, frozen on that split second where he looks up as if searching for a lens he can't quite see. Talk shows rehearse the same phrases: predatory, methodical, chilling, deviant. The title never changes. Bilbao 1997 cold case solves, surprise arrest rattles entire community. The rest is ornamental. The verdict is treated as inevitable before a jury ever sits down. Inside the courthouse, the story is simplified. That's what systems do to survive complexity. They shave off edges until what's left fits into boxes people can tick. The prosecution presents a clean diagram, a timeline starting with the first notebook entry running through the stalking the storage unit. The gloves, the scarf, the forest. The suspect becomes a line of cause and effect that ends at a body beneath pine needles. The defense tries to widen the frame. Missing child reports surveillance anomalies, the figure no one can adequately describe without sounding like they're trying to lose the jury on purpose. Their objections land like pebbles thrown at a freight train. The lead investigator testifies. He sits in the witness box under hot lights that make his shirt cling to his back. The prosecutor leads him through the facts: where the scarf was found, how the DNA threads connect to the suspect, how the storage units tie back to his employment records, how the notebooks map his obsession over weeks. Every answer he gives is technically true. Every answer leaves something out. Not because he wants to protect the suspect, because this room is not built for what else he's seen. The defense asks about other possible suspects, about other presences near the bridge that night, about whether the investigator believes there might have been more than one person involved in what happened. He feels 20 pairs of juror eyes pinned to his face, feels the prosecutor's attention like a knife at his side, feels the entire weight of the city listening for permission to keep things simple. Based on the evidence available, he says each word slow, steady. We have identified one individual whose actions, patterns, and proximity make him responsible for her death. It's not the whole truth, but it's not a lie. The forensic analyst testifies about the lab work. She walks the jury through DNA recovery materials, analysis microscopic residues. She does not talk about lights flickering on bridges or voices slipping through glitches. She talks about fabrics and metals and probabilities instead. When the defense pushes, "Did your lab detect anything unexplained in the recordings from that night?" she answers with precision. "We detected technical anomalies consistent with equipment interference," she says. "Nothing I would present as reliable evidence of another person's presence." It's not the whole truth, but it's not a lie. In the end, the jury does what everyone expected them to do. They convict. The sentencing hearing is quiet and grim. The suspect stands, hands clasped in front of him. He does not look at the victim's family. Only the mother has returned to hear the words, and he does not flinch when the judge reads the years aloud like a countdown in reverse. When asked if he has anything to say, he pauses a long time, long enough that the room leans forward. "I watched her," he says at last. "That is true. I did not stop what happened to her. That is also true. Every other truth you will have to live with yourselves." The judge tells him this is not remorse. He says nothing. He is led away. Outside, the headlines unfurl exactly as written: closure, justice, finality. A montage plays on evening news, the girl's smiling photo, the bridge. The storage unit door rolling open, a file labeled cold case stamped closed. With a sound effect someone in a distant editing room thought would feel satisfying. People at home nod, absorb the narrative, let it fold into the part of their brains where unfinished stories go to rest once someone assures them it's safe to stop thinking about them. The lead investigator doesn't stop thinking about it. He is back on duty in other cases, other scenes, other corridors with other echoes. But sometimes when he walks through certain parts of the city, his body reacts before his mind remembers why. At a particular corner, his shoulders tense, expecting a girl who'll never emerge from a cafe doorway again. At a certain hour near the river, his steps unconsciously slow, matching a pace that isn't his. On the bridge, if he ever crosses it near 2211, he finds himself counting. 1 step, 2. Look back. He never used to do that. The analyst returns to the lab to microscopes and centrifuges and files. She processes other evidence, other fibers, other threads. But every time she logs something into long-term storage, she feels the skin between her shoulder blades tighten as if someone is staring down the aisle between shelves. She checks the camera feeds more often now. Not because anyone told her to, because she can't not. One night alone, she scrolls through archived footage from the night of the reenactment. Not the public angles, not the bridge camera the prosecutor deemed too unreliable to bother with. A side angle, one that caught only the investigator's shoulders and part of the rail. She runs it frame by frame again, not looking for proof this time. Looking for patterns. She sees something she missed before. In the frame, just after the figure pointed at the railing in the half-second, before the light stuttered and everything felt wrong. There's a tiny shift in the investigator's posture, a lean forward, a tilt of the head the way someone does when they hear their name called from a crowd. But his mouth never opens in the audio they recorded on site. He never mentions hearing it. No one remembers calling him. She rewinds, plays those few frames over, again. If something happens, it won't be random. She hears in her head the girl's handwriting pressed into the paper so hard it almost cut through. They were waiting from the missing child report. They looked at me like they'd been waiting from the suspect's early testimony. She wasn't surprised from his quietest confession. Who did you think you were walking toward? The analyst whispers to the screen. Us, him, them, yourself. The footage doesn't answer. Months later, the suspect is moved to a long-term facility. The city stops saying his name on the news. He becomes an entry in a database, a case finally attached to the word resolved. Guards say he's quiet, orderly, no trouble at all. He reads, he writes, he doesn't talk much. He asks once if the bridge still looks the same. The guard shrugs. Haven't been there in years. He nods as if that's all he wanted to know. That everyone else gets to walk on ground that isn't permanently fused to one night in 1997. He keeps a notebook even though they check it. He knows better than to record certain things. He writes instead about practical details of the prison yard, which birds land on the fence, which guards drag their right foot a little when tired, which inmates pace in even steps versus odd. Patterns. He can't help it. His brain has always been a net hungry for repetitions. Sometimes late when the wing is quiet and the fluorescent lights buzz in their particular way, he feels something like a draft move across his cell. He looks at the corner where the wall meets the ceiling. Nothing is there. But the air has that charged quality he remembers from the storage corridor, and the bridge, and the interview room, right before the camera, cut to static. You weren't supposed to stay, he says to the empty space. You were supposed to leave with her. No one answers. In Bilbao, life knits itself back together around the gap the case once occupied. New businesses open, new crimes happen, new headlines crowd the archives. The bridge becomes less a crime scene and more a landmark again, though the plaques and flowers and engraved date ensure it never returns fully to anonymity. Tourists ask about it sometimes. Their guides give them the short version Girl Gone case cold DNA arrest conviction closure. Nobody mentions the figure at the edge of the light, except the ones who feel watched crossing at very specific times and don't have the language to explain why. The lead investigator considers retirement more often now, not because of this case alone, but because of what it left behind in the way he sees his work. He still believes in evidence. Still believes in justice as far as human beings are capable of approximating it. But he no longer believes that every true thing fits on a line between unsolved and solved. Some things live in the margins. One evening, long after the trial, he sits at his kitchen table with both notebooks open, the copies he wasn't supposed to make but did. Her observations. His observations. Two people who never met writing around the same invisible shape. He writes one more entry in his own notebook in smaller, tighter handwriting than usual. She noticed us. We never fully noticed her back. That's the part that feels like failure. He shuts the cover, puts both books in a drawer, locks it. The analyst that same evening walks home a different way on purpose. No bridge, no river, no storage facility in her peripheral vision. But halfway down an unfamiliar street, she feels it, that subtle shift in the air, that sensation of being inside someone else's fixed point. She stops, looks behind her. Nothing. She laughs at herself, shaky but real. Not everything is a pattern. Not every shadow is watching. But as she turns to continue walking, she catches her reflection in a shop window. Hair pulled back, shoulders slightly, tense eyes scanning the space behind her. She looks exactly like the girl did in the photograph from the gallery flyer in 1997. "I see you," she tells the reflection quietly. To the girl, to the child, to the city, to whatever else learned to live at 2211 on certain nights. On the anniversary of the night, the bridge fills with candles again. Fewer cameras this time. More locals. The lead investigator goes standing back like before. The analyst goes standing beside him. They say nothing. There's nothing left to say that they haven't already said to each other, to files, to empty air. Down the rail, a young woman places a scarf on the metal, not purple, not a replica, just hers. A gesture, a thread. She pauses, fingers resting on the fabric, then steps back to join the others. For a moment, the image doubles: another girl, another scarf, another night. The investigator feels the familiar pressure in the air. "Don't look," he mutters to himself. He looks anyway. For a heartbeat for less than that, a small figure stands at the very edge of the vigil's light, at the point where the lamppost glow gives up and the dar takes over. Head tilted, arms loose, watching not the bridge this time, but the people on it. Watching their rituals, their attempts to fold a messy, unclosed story into something they can carry without dropping it. This time the figure doesn't raise a hand, doesn't point, doesn't walk closer. They just stand there like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that might not actually be the last one. The investigator doesn't move. The analyst's fingers brush his sleeve just once. "You see them?" she asks. "Yes." "Are they stuck?" she asks. He thinks of the missing child report, of the notes about already having been at the river, of the way their outline kept appearing wherever the pattern was strongest. He thinks of the suspect's exhausted admission, "We weren't alone." He thinks of the girl's final line in her notebook. "If something happens, it won't be random." "I don't know," he answers. The candles burn lower, the crowd disperses, the river keeps moving. Eventually, when only a few stubborn flames remain, he looks back to the edge of the light. The figure is gone. Maybe they stepped forward at last. Maybe they stepped back. Maybe they were never there in a way a camera or a report could accept. The official story is simple now. A headline, a mugshot, a bridge with a date on a plaque, a city that waited nearly 3 decades for someone to say "solved" into a microphone. But under that, in the places where people don't talk as loud, another story flickers like a glitch in the recording one, about patterns, about watching, about what happens when someone notices the wrong thing at exactly the right time. It never makes it into the file. It never makes it onto the news. It just stays here in the thin strip of space between the river and the rail, between 2210 and 2212, between the moment someone becomes visible and the moment they disappear. The place a headline can't reach. The place the city pretends not to see, even as something in it keeps noticing them back.